The street is my world. I don't pretend to go uptown and be anything fancy. I can, but I find more real in the world that I'm in than I do the tinsel. And the real world is the one I have to deal with every day, you know. Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
Let the bass kick.
Playtime been over since y'all dropped the ball. Bound to the continent, there's no asylum for y'all. Pushing the black Asiatic game with Ford L and Pool Bay. Before NOI, I rep draw L all day. How many fakes proclaim to be the reincarnation and claim to be the true head of the Moorish nation? No mention of Mealy Ill, but I read his letters. Dirty Moors mad cause they thought they dead as letters. Many were there when decisions were handed down. Now they claim that Mealy Ill was not ordained, not commissioned, not called or appointed. With divine plans for ages, but Dirty Moors making changes. Working with FBI during infiltrations. In a pheasant alleys giving bogey smoke inhalations. And secret wars were made, heads are made in public mentions. Don't believe, get the minutes of the first convention. Kirkman and Lomax Bay got called out as villains against the Prophet Soden and L. Call Givens. Thousands of Moorish Americans followed those leaders that killed the prophet and made Moors parrots, not readers. They don't study, brains hollow. To crush the truth, plant dissension in the ones that follow. Robbed the treasury, felt like they hit the lotto. Took advantage of the faithful Moors in their times of sorrow. Moments still critical, 100 years later, the message. Stick to the principles in your actions, be progressive. Don't sell your soul for a title, take your membership role. Watch out for grand cheeks pushing you in a censorship hole. The sellout was great, now they're comfy and won't get the hell out. Active Moors come around, they get clumsy. Not humbly, but act grumpy and jumpy. Active Moors see them touchy and think it's lovely. With faces ugly, I push back so don't shove me. If not for love, it would be just as Dirty Moors get from me. Hitting all reincarnates with writs of discovery and demanding the treasury recovery and law for money. Wearing affairs don't make you a Moorish adept. Dirty Moorish heads are Boy Scouts and cadets. Working for FBI inspectors, slaves for gadgets. Claiming they got pulled but they really dead magnets. Running a fraud that's done cause new Moors are here. One for all for one profit like musketeers. Bay, not Tampa or Buccaneers. I strike nerves like harp or strings on those puppeteers. Pushing misconceptions as teachings and calling it facts. Swinging my scimitar tongue, not a fireman's axe. Quick to call me out as dirty, say I violate acts. If you don't nationalize, know that I annihilate blacks. Nail them through their palms and incepts on beams of wood. Burn crosses on black lawns in my Moorish hood. Black Klansmen like movie from 1960s. White power, not supremacy like Clayton Bigsby. Now I run through illusions, battling my arch nemesis misconfusion. She's been trying to keep me out of course, facing losses, calling all her negative forces. 99 years past, Drew Ali said 50 would pass, and you wouldn't know about me, or even know what I brought for you. NOI and UNIA knew about him too. Most thought that they could bury the movement, be in charge, passive and abuse it. But Drew said new Moors would come with eyes open, seeing and knowing, far from hoping. Far from belief in faith, master fruition. Study the laws of nature, activate intuition. One day our wheels of industry will stop, and when it starts again, Moors will be on top. Drew Ali blessed with latent power. Warned you, get out the way or be ground to powder. Drew Ali didn't kill you fast, but he brought you your title and estate vast. Confusion continues to confuse, no remembrance of Maghrib al-Aqsa by Moorish descendants. Now I run through illusions, battling my arch nemesis misconfusion. She's been trying to keep me out of course, facing losses, calling all her negative forces.
It's still to be determined. You've got to give the judge your bank statements, okay? You think you can do that? I'm sure you can do that. By the way, tell me about your hat. I don't see those very often.
This is a fez. I'm a Moorish American.
Okay.
Yes.
And
Moorish Americans are descendants of the ancient Moabites who inhabited the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa, but born in America.
well, congratulations. Yes. Don't see those very often, you know?
You see us all the time. We're the misnomer so-called Negroes, Blacks, and Coloreds, and African Americans. Our proper political political distinction is Moors.
Moors.
Yes.
Well, I learned something. Thank you very much.
That was another thing that I was realizing that we need to do as well, We need to start getting ourselves up to speed on technology and having our own servers, our own, not to say that they can't be hacking those things, but that's, I think we're woefully short on that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And actually, that's what the internet actually started. That's the purpose of the internet. It actually started as a defense mechanism.
Of course.
For war.
Of course. It was an army
Yes.
instrument to begin with, right? Yeah. A military
Yes.
instrument.
Yeah, they were using it to spy on other countries and to strategize for military tactics way before it became available to the public.
Right. And to me now, it's become a declassified system, but still with the same purpose in mind, right? To have all of us, we know this already. They've got supercomputers monitoring all of this.
Absolutely. The same, like you said, the same purpose in mind, just on another level.
Right.
Where it can be used for good, it could be used for educational purposes by the general public. People can get a vast education via the internet.
Right.
But it really benefits those that are doing it for other reasons.
And controlling it, and this is where my issue has always been. At the push of a button, they could shut this down if they wanted to, right? Which to me is the real issue. If they can control how we can communicate, which is what they've been doing, our flow, then that's amazing.
Absolutely.
They can't shut the internet down.
And then people will be.
No, but they could shut this down.
People have been, especially the newer generations, they have been so accustomed to everything at their fingers.
Yeah.
So they don't know how to research.
Yeah.
They don't know how to communicate in other ways. They really don't know how to think. Because the internet does all of that for you. The phone does all of that for you. Google and Siri does these things for you. So therefore, if they did cut it off, people would really, really be at a disadvantage where they can't move.
Well, I'll end on this.
Look at what happened in Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
where they didn't have any electricity, and a lot of them still don't.
Right.
But talk about phone and internet, these things, that's been out of communication for months. They've been forced to learn how to live again.
Exactly. But I think nothing. Oh yeah. So, yeah.
We can go right back there. We're just gonna start.
Sorry.
It's all good work.
I want to thank you too before we start for the time that you've given us. Thank you.
Islam.
We're just gonna start with the North American prayer. Father on the left, on the right. Face the east. Allah, the Father of the universe.
Allah, the Father of the universe.
Father of love.
Father of love.
Truth. Peace. Freedom. And justice.
And justice.
Allah is my protector.
Allah is my protector.
My guide.
My guide.
And my salvation.
And my salvation.
By night.
And by day. And by day.
Through his holy prophet.
Through his holy prophet.
Noble Ali.
Noble Ali.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Islam. So we're here for our number 2 session, Correcting Black History. And today our presenter, our builder, Grand Sheikh Nature El Bey. We give a round of applause for that. We also want to give a round of applause to Brother Izzy Bey for making sure that we got our stuff going on correctly. So,
Thank you, Izzy.
Before we started up, last week we had Dr. Kaba. He did his presentation. That's up on YouTube. Tomorrow we're going to be doing our town hall meeting. It's going to be right here in the other room, 29 St. Denis. Before we got before we got started, you were building about the whole idea of the internet thing and all that. If you can, after you introduce yourself and all that, if you could speak about the difference between what studying was you know, when he used to go law library and all that stuff, and now, and the advantages that people should take of being that they have information at their fingertips the way they do.
Islam?
Islam, boy.
Islam, you finished?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, yeah, I'm hearing you pretty low, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying.
Yeah, I don't think I was in front of the mic. That was my bad.
Yeah, that's a lot better. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. So the question was if you can talk about what studying meant when, or let's say the difference between what people call studying now, being that they have the internet, and studying when we used to go to libraries and stuff like that to study. And if you could also speak on, things that people should do with the internet since they have it, as far as information or gathering information.
All right, Islam. Well, again, for the record, I am Lord Noble Nature El Bey, Grand Sheikh of Temple Number 10 in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And addressing the question at hand, I want to say Islam to all the Moors in Canaanland, all the conscious Asiatic and all the unconscious Asiatic. So moving forward, we're looking at a day and time where, like we were just discussing, that we have the internet, we have the phones, we have a lot of means of communication versus what we had back in the days, the traditional ways of studying when we came in back in the late 90s, early 2000, things was a lot different. And I'm going to start by explaining the difference just in the studying aspect of things. But back then, especially, remember you had the World Trade Center that went down back in, what was it, 99, 2000, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And that actually marked a new era of time. And symbolically, it marked a new era of time. And that's one of the reasons why those buildings actually came down. That's another discussion. But we have to look at what those buildings actually represented. You know, they call them the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center. You know, and remember it says World Trade Center. It wasn't just the United States of America Trade Center or the New York Trade Center. You know, these buildings was the center of commerce for the world. You know, you had a lot of different administrative offices that was in that building for many different nations and nation states that handled commerce. You know, so when you hear that term, the New World Order, you know, it was a new way, it was a symbolic representation of the old way was out and a new way was about to come into the beginning. Then you hear the term the New World Order, centralized government, and things of that nature. All of that has to play. I don't want to really stay on that topic too long, but I will come back to it because it's relevant. But back in those days, you had, the internet wasn't really popular for the public. So the people that was less fortunate, and definitely less fortunate meaning financially less fortunate, didn't really have the means towards that. Even like cell phones and things was reserved for the elite back then. You know, when cell phones first came out, I mean, that was a hot item, but you had to be hustling or whatever if you was coming from the hood to even afford one of those things. You know, and they definitely didn't have any internet with it to start off with. So back then, Moors, you had the Moor Science Temple that was functioning and still in a physical structure, but what happened was the Moor Science Temple wasn't doing any outreach to the public. And I want you to think back not from outreach that's being done today. I'm talking about outreach back in the 90s. Let's just go back into that era of time for a minute, where the only outreaches that could be done was physically in the neighborhoods, or doing newspapers, or doing VHS tapes, VCR. Those are really the only ways of outreaches that you can do back then. You definitely had television and radio, but that was still something that was outside of our financial reach. So back then, the Moors that were outreaching to the public, coming from like the Great Seal era, was doing a lot of things via VCR tapes. And that was really the public's reach, or the public's communication for education and outreach. Physical lectures was being done. And this was all coming from, again, from different various Moorish organizations that was outside the temples. So Moors were doing lectures, and those lectures was being recorded and put on VCR tapes. And that's how myself got, by viewing tapes via VCR that people were selling, in the street corners and things of that nature. People like Phil Valentine, Bobby Hemmett, C. Freeman L., just to name a few. Those are some of your old-time veterans that were putting things on VCR tapes back in the day, and that was a form of studying. And we're going to examine that word study, in a few. As far as other information, we know that it was hard to get information from a library because it wasn't categorized as Moorish science, and it's still not. So one has to be already trained and learn how to study Moorish science or where to get it from. At this point, any of us can go and find Moorish science anywhere. We can look in movies, it's on TV now, but you gotta have an eye for it, you gotta have an ear for it. And that's only because we've been trained for that. But back in the day, before we had this vast communication, it was very hard to get Moorish information. So we give honor to our elders for putting those VCR tapes out, because that actually brought us into this new generation that we're in now. And to go back into that era again, the Moorish Science Temple was, I don't want to say the Moorish Science Temple because I don't want anyone to misunderstand me, but those that were sitting in seats of the Moorish Science Temple were not reaching out to the people according to how the Prophet instructions was. So therefore, the Moorish Science Temple was stagnating in its growth because Moors that was in the temple wasn't putting out information like it should have been. And they were holding a lot of private meetings. I'm talking back in the 90s again. They were holding a lot of meetings that really wasn't open to the public, and the doors was open to the public, wasn't out communicating to the people, letting them know that they was there and this is what is going on and this is why you need to come there. So it was more like a private meeting. So therefore it didn't serve as the vehicle for higher education and so-called Black history and Moorish information. It didn't serve as that vehicle back in those days. So when we looked at those VCR tapes, it gave us hope. It gave us something else to look at outside of our everyday traditional information that was put out there. And we had to go back and cross-examine and look at what we was hearing on these VCR tapes. And that's another thing where these were just sort of like lectures and VCR tapes where you still didn't really know where to go and get the information. You couldn't just go to a class with Valentine or Phil Valentine. You couldn't just go sit into a class with C. Freeman L. because it wasn't an every week curriculum, like we have with the Moorish Science Temple, where we know we open every Friday and every Sunday and the public can just come. We did not have that back then. So when we seen things on VCR tapes, we had to just keep watching the tape over and over again until we got lucky enough to somebody tell us when another lecture is going to take place. And then if it was within your traveling distance, then you would, make it your business to go there. And that was the only time you would get any type of Moorish socialization. So that's bringing me back into a time era where you had to really be zealous to really want to get this education. Back then, it's those who really wanted it was the ones who got it because they made it their business to go get it. It was not at their fingertips. It wasn't a 5 or 10 minute drive to go somewhere to be around Moors. You couldn't even get literature like that, so it wasn't available. You had the lesson books from Taj Tariq, giving honor to him as well as one of the elders. But we was lucky if we got our hands on that stuff back in the day. So the studying aspect was kind of hard. We couldn't, in order to study and to read, you got to have something physical as a reference to do it. And it was very hard to get your hands on that type of stuff back then. The Prophet started the newspaper back in 1927, but again, when he passed on and his administration was compromised, they had stopped the paper for a long time. And then Moors in their own will might have came out a few years and might have put a newspaper or two together, but it wasn't consistent. So the public went for a long time without really a newsletter or a newspaper in circulation. So Moorish outreach was very slim, coming into things. And then when you did get the information, it was just like a shock, like a surprise. You didn't really know if it was true, it sounded good. It was like you couldn't debate because you didn't have the information to debate it. So it was just like you was in awe with it. In different areas was privy to different information, so they will all have a different background of what they were accustomed to according to their territory. Like here, we're in New Jersey territory, and New Jersey and New York is very close together, and Philadelphia, of course. So we had a lot of different schools of thoughts around here, and prominently the Nation of Gods and Earth, very heavy around here. So we already had a sort of knowledge of self background as youth coming into this, going to school at an early age, we're learning certain things. Clarence X actually had taught, through the 5% lessons. Mixture of that in the Muslim community, so not eating pork and things of that nature was already understood by the youth. For certain areas like your southern states, a lot of them are just now catching on to some of these things. You see elders, not elders, but people our age, 30, 40, 50 years old, still eating pork and just a slower rhythm, a slower consciousness. The information out in the South was very slim. So bringing that more up to speed, so we went from the VHS to a lot of what we call the CDs, where a lot of more started putting stuff on CDs. It still wasn't visual, but we went to that CD era. More started mixing music with things and doing lectures and handing out CDs, and people were able to be more mobile with the information, and people start learning more that way. Because you do have certain people that's visual, and some people there's more audio what they're learning. Especially up in the north areas where you have your subways and your buses, your mass transit they call it. A lot of people are not home all the time, so they didn't have opportunities and chances to sit down and watch VHS tapes. Versus like with myself and a group that I started with, we used to lock ourselves in the room all day and just watch VHS tape after VHS tape. And it took up, most of our time, but we were dedicated, we wanted to learn, and we were fortunate to get with some brothers upstate New York that actually encouraged us to study astrology. When we first came in. So we went to the library a lot, to the physical library. You know, each community has a county library. You know, each small township or city will have a library. Each school will have a library, but they're limited on information that they have. So when you get into your county libraries are much broader in information, and the librarians there are more skilled in what information is out there, and they can help you. And we used to go to the county libraries a lot, and we used to pack our lunch. We used to go there and we used to stay for 6-7 hours. And we already had a foundation of what we were looking for because we had the VHS tapes already that was informing us of certain things. So we had to go research it and pick it up through different forms of literature. Again, because we didn't have all these lessons just handed to us. So we went to the libraries and questioned the librarian. We went there in an intelligent tone, asked for help, let them know what we were looking for. Then what we used to do is when we find something in these books that we were looking at or that we like, we have to make copies of it. And they have a copying machine there, and you had to have some change, and you made copies of pages that you found. And that became your portfolio or your folder. That became your book, your study guide. So, you know, we came in from that angle. So going to the library was something that we looked forward to. And then as we started to study the law, then we found out that yes, a lot of these libraries have a law section in there. You know, so you can go get limited amount of information from the law section of the library. But then we start to look into what they call the federal library. So if you go to the county's courthouse, you can find a federal library in the courthouse. And that's just on a local level. And the federal library will have more of your statutes, your codes, your United States statutes at large and things of that nature. You know, and then you can start pulling out information that you need, because even now you still might have to go there in law because a lot of the stuff is still not made public, only because they reserve it for their bar members. So it's still hard to find certain law references and case laws that you might need to put pieces together. It's still kind of hard to get that off the internet. You know, to the fact that each temple and each group should also subscribe to what they call Westlaw. And Westlaw is a law publication forum. It publishes law books for interns and attorneys. So it's a paid membership, and Westlaw is not the only one, but it's the most popular one. But interns and students that's in law school have to subscribe to Westlaw to start get the references to do their homework and to do their studies. So each Moors group should have a membership to Westlaw. So just take note on that if you haven't already done that. They have an online membership for that, where you can get, like, even the Black's Law dictionaries how we have now. A lot of that was hard to find back in the day. So Black's Law was a hot topic. They used to sell Black's Law dictionary for like $100, $200 when you did find it because it was rare. And you had to go through like a usedbooks.com and places like that to try to get it, or you find attorneys that was renewing their collection of books, and you tell them you want to buy out their books that they're renewing, because every 2 or 3 years they order new books. So that's a good way to get your law library up to stock, is by finding an attorney or a law office that want to throw out their books or whatever. You can give them a donation, and you come by with a van and just take the ones that they get rid of. Any questions before I go forward?
I don't really want to have questions.
Yeah.
Can't see you, man.
You good?
Yeah. Peace and love.
Peace.
This is Julia Udi Moore speaking.
Salam to you, bro.
Salam, brother, man. As far as in this Black History Month, I am mindful that there is many that still don't know of the information of Moors that's wrongfully presented yearly, on a daily basis, not only through this so-called month, but as far as in Black History Month, what words, what concepts or what venues do you see that is beneficial to raise in the children's minds, to have them to make note of themselves and not to take on a perception of Black history? And I'm to kind of go off topic a little bit, but I remember in the Quran it makes mention of this, I think it's the 12th chapter, and then the Christ is speaking of, he sees the people them in their faces like, they're tired some, you know, they're like, they're tired some, and they're like, oh, he's talking to them about happiness and stuff like that, and he speaks to them about happiness with the same things that they are mindful of. You know, about the ground, they're toiling on the ground, but instead of grounding themselves with their own things that they can identify, they can only attach themselves onto the things that they know. Christ is telling them that, you know, the noble majority speaking, and he's breaking it down in his wording, that, you know, they got to look deeper on and not only see for what they see as face value, but they got to look deeper. So I guess, with that being said, my question is, what are the venues that we can do our part to show the youth to look deeper in themselves and push aside this black, apart from we speaking on blacks and not a nationality? What are the venues that we can show the youth them?
Islam. That's a great question. And you know, the people are tired, some not just from toiling or laboring, but also from being misrepresented, from being injured, racial profiling, and all of these other things, and also by being minorities economically. And I think that on a higher level, we think that children are uninformed or have a lower way of examining things, but really we need to come at them higher than what we're coming with ourselves. And they're coming from a new era of time. And this is why the celebrity and the TV and what they call the so-called stars have their attention, is because the stars seem not to be toiling. Their stars seem to be happy. So they're the happy toilers in the view of the youth these days. So now the children, role models become the celebrities and not the parents, not the one that's kicking to them some knowledge that they need for growth and development. So I think we have to incorporate the information, the knowledge in with the finances to really get the attention of the youth. If they don't see that you're financially stable and happy and successful, and maybe not to the degree of the celebrities like Jay-Z and them, they don't have to be that successful, but meaning that if they can see growth, then you catch their attention. So I'm a big fan of really trying to incorporate the finances, you know, with the education that we're teaching them at the same time. You know, because, you know, like the rappers used to say, you know, like Jay-Z said, if you broke, what can you tell me? You know, so the concept is the same. And so how the child is thinking that if you broke, why should I listen to you? You know, so now we get into Drew's lessons where he speaks about it takes finances to uplift a nation. We got to really examine why is he saying that, and what type of upliftment is he talking about? Because we can emotionally uplift people, you know, And that's what they're doing with that so-called Black Power type movement. The whole Black History Month that you're making reference to is to emotionally arouse the Asiatics. But it doesn't financially arouse the Asiatics. You know, so that's what I would like to zero in on the most is, okay, where do we go from here? All right, you teach me about this ancestor or this so-called black figure. How does that change my current position, my current status? What does that do for my current nation, my current people? How can we get out the hood with this information? You know, and it lacks that. The whole purpose of the Black History Month is not for that purpose from them. So we can't expect those to give us a corner or give us a month to celebrate or to emotionally talk about ourselves. For those who gave that to us, it was not for the intentions of really uplifting ourselves. I know we're past that, but just saying for those that's not really understanding Drew's program, right? It needs to be brought to that perspective that it makes no sense to talk about anyone or anything if we can't show them how it can help their present condition. So I think we simultaneously need to take the lessons and make it benefit ourselves and whoever that we're teaching at the same time. And that's why we started the the business enterprise of the Moorish Trucking and the Moorish Express and certain things is to give the people and give our youth something else to look at other than just telling them that they're not black, that they're Moor. You know, because, all right, they can accept that, but the political status is still the same. The economical status is the same if they can't take that and do anything with it. If they're, like we just talked about, if we're still slaving on a job and working for another, then that individual or that company, that family still has control over our growth and development. So we're still economically distressed as long as we're studying these lessons, talking about these lessons, but can't express it culturally at the same time. If we can't implement our culture into our workplace, into our toiling, then it's really for naught. And we can't expect someone else to really want to be like that. No one wants to be in poverty and suffer. So just generally speaking, it looks like the Moorish nation is broke, looking from the outside in. Let's just keep it real. For someone that's looking from the outside in to go on the internet and just view what's going on, it doesn't economically drive them to want to participate. It might make them want to accept certain truth that's brought out that's not debatable. You know, but it's more like a charity case where it doesn't seem like it's going to help them go to the next level. This is why you got a lot of Moors coming in and looking for schemes, because they're looking for a way to satisfy the financial aspect and still study at the same time. Because going back to what I was saying earlier, we used to go to the library all day. To really get to where we at, you have to put in hours, time. And now we're going to challenge that with our everyday activity, especially if you got children, you got a family. You know, you got to share your time with that and work at the same time. There's only 24 hours in a day. They want you to work 8 to 10 hours of that day. You still got to go to rest for a good portion of that. They recommend 8 hours of sleep. So how much time are you really working with to study? It's very limited. And then, you know, we're dealing with time ratio and if we're getting paid by the hour, well, how much are we really getting per hour? And if we got to work 8 to 10 hours or some working 2 jobs to try to make ends meet, I mean, that's still slavery coming from my interpretation of it. It's still a form of slavery. And if we don't address that with the teachings, then the youth is looking at it as for naught. You follow me more?
Indeed.
Indeed more. Respect for that.
So we got to look at economic programs to incorporate with this, even for the so-called Black History Month, which we just capitalize off of the time, put the information out. But we do this 12 months of the year, but we economically have to do it at the same time. This is why when we look at our celebrities that get wind of Moorish information, you see that they take bits and pieces of it just to improve their own self. Some is more, gravitated towards the spirit of this than others. But they don't want to compromise their economical program at the same time. So especially when it comes to celebrities, they kind of like very cautious on how they deal with this movement. They got to deal with the movement from a distance, because they're trying to figure out a way on how to maintain that salary that they're getting and not compromise that, but still accept the truth at the same time. It's very difficult for people who is successful. So even when people that are successful want to take it to a step further, they choose who they want to deal with or who that they consult with, and they look for situations or people who they feel like economically have a foundation, because they're afraid to lose things like assets and things of that nature. So you can't just go play around with changing your name or correcting your status, and if these people got 4 or 5 houses and businesses and royalties and inheritance, they got to be very cautious on how they move forward, because they don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize that. So that all comes into account of taking this to the next level.
Islam, God, Islam. I had this discussion with a couple of Moors today. I don't think it has anything to do with, it has a lot to do with economics, but I don't think whether they're Black or Moors, or declared Moors, or whatever you want to call themselves, it's just knowing economics. Like the simplicity of taking the dollar from corporate and circling that dollar. I don't think our people get that concept, whether they're Moors or Black. I don't think, that's why, it's beyond that. That's why the celebrities, yes, they get the information, but what are you waiting for? How much more money do you want to make? Make a sacrifice. Do you want to feel sorry for you when you become Bill Cosby or Kanye West or Tiger Woods? Make a sacrifice at some point. Sacrifices have to be made at some point. You can't just straddle the fence. I gotta worry about the compromise. So what about people that died? We're talking about fiat. You know what I mean? So personally,
those speaking, different souls though. I'm with you.
Personally speaking, I don't think whether they're Black or Moors, declared or not, the people just don't understand economics. It's that simple. It's easy for them to go work 9 hours, 8 hours, and then go to Walmart and blow that money without even thinking about, let me put 30, 40 bucks into one of the businesses, somebody's business. Regardless if you would just support. Other communities do that religiously. We don't. I don't know. That's my point.
Again, that's a good point, and I would just add on to it again. That's part of the slave syndrome of not understanding economics, regardless of what they're proclaiming. Like you said, it's still the point that everybody has been indoctrinated with slavery, and that's a slave mentality, to not want to circulate your money within your own family. The problem is, one of the problems is, even on a conscious level, say for a Moorish American that's conscious right now, where do you circulate your money at? Just not you personally, but just collectively. Who do we have that we can purchase our almond milk from? What Moorish farms do we have where we can purchase our own farming and put shares in our own farming? We got Moors that's producing apparel, like the one I'm looking at. We should support more of those things than we do on a lower level, but we don't have too many choices on where we circulate our dollar. versus, I'm gonna just throw it out there, the Jews, you know, the Chinese, the different nationalities. They don't share the same slave breeding that we have.
Islam.
So what occurs is, from an economic perspective, they're already strong in those areas. So if you look at, they got Chinatown, they got Colombian town, they got the so-called Indian town or Hindu towns. They all have their communities where they can circulate their dollar, and they do. But these are people that already are conscious of nationality and nation building and nationalism. Where we're just learning that we just learning what the word nationality means. And we're limited on who we can share this information with. And then we're really limited on the national businesses that we have that we can support and keep recirculating. So you're not forced, you can keep your Federal Reserve notes in your pocket. But at a point, you're forced to go spend it with someone that's not of your own nation or your own conscious group.
Islam, God. To add to that, I'll give you an example. I don't think it's rocket science at this point for, say, one more to connect with somebody and get some almond milk and box it and sell it. It's not hard in this day and age, and you don't need a...
I didn't hear you. Can you repeat that?
I said I don't think it's hard for example, for one more to say they want to start an almond milk business and connect with the right person and get almond milk and box it and sell it. In this day and age, it's not that hard. You don't need a storefront anymore. So we don't need a Chinatown or street town per se. We just need people. It takes nothing to start a business on the internet. It takes nothing. But again, it goes back to this mentality where people want to open up a spot. You don't need a spot. You don't need a physical spot. Just get the right product and push it. Like somebody came to deliver a pure little guy, a more, dark-skinned brother, seen him, came to my door to deliver some parcel, and I was just talking to him about being like the same thing, him starting out his own business out of the blue. I think we just get used to it, comfortable with just the construct, the matrix. We're just too comfortable in it. So it's like we're getting the information, but it's like we're running on fumes. You feel what I'm saying? Like we're not really going nowhere. Like we got this really great engine, but the car is sitting on blocks. You dig what I'm saying? Like we have a great engine, the best engine, like that fathered other engines that are doing better than. Like it's I don't know. I just see it different. It's the people. I don't. It's the people. At the end of the day, it's us. It's us. We just got to get our act together. There's no outside forces. There's no phantom. There's nothing like that. It's us. It's us. Let's start a business. How many of us own a business here? Aside from your 9 to 5, who has something? I'd love to go to somebody and just say, yo, you sell onions? I'm going to get onions off you. Find somebody, be a supplier of onions. Because I buy onions at least once a week. You go get carrots. It's that simple. Do something on the side. I'm not saying put your 9 to 5. Start something on the side that's going to help us. It's that simple. It's not rocket science. I just think that people are just straight lazy. That's my opinion. Islam.
Islam, and again, you're right on that note as well. And to me, to fix the problem, it all comes from the teachings, the proper teachings going out into the when I speak about nationality, that's included in that. What you're talking about is a highlight of what I feel nationality is. Where someone else might feel like they want to get into the dynamics of the status in the law and maybe going to address a court case, which that's fine too. But again, the plebiscite has to be raised where the people will see the necessity and importance on why to proclaim a nationality. Why do we need a nation at all? Because like Drew said, if you're not going to do nothing with it, you might as well turn in your card and button. There's no need to say you're a nation or to try to build a nation if we're not going to address these subjects.
Islam more.
Because what really occurs is, remember, we talked about in the beginning protecting and securing the birthright. Now, we can't properly do that without resources to do that. Because there's an acknowledgement, and when the prophet speaks about being recognized by other nations, how are we recognized? What makes you recognized? A legal fact is one thing. We got legal fact to back what we're doing. But that's not what's going to make us recognized. What's going to make us recognized is trade and resources. If we can't trade with other nation states, then they're not going to recognize you. What am I talking about? Let's go back into the earlier days of our nation. We talk about the United States was first recognized by the Emperor of Morocco or by Morocco. Okay, that's a fact. But how did they recognize them? What did they do? What was the reason why the Sultan or the Emperor recognized the United States? It was for trade and commerce. So they were allowed to come to the ports now and do trade and commerce with the other nations. So yes, there was tariffs and things that was involved in that, but the main thing of a nation is for trade and commerce. So we keep talking nation, but not talking trade and commerce. And that's really the highlight of any nation. That's how they survive.
Straight. Islam.
They came out with that so-called Black Wall Street. Are y'all familiar with that years ago?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
anybody familiar with Black Wall Street?
Yes, we are more.
All right. So the concept was the same. The status in the nation and nationalism was taken away from that umbrella. But like you said, it don't matter if you nationalized or not, or people can see the need of coming together and circulating their own money. Everybody can see the need of that. The point is, how effective can it be and where can it go without nationalism is the issue. So we're not worried about any celebrities got all the fiat that's needed to do what we're talking about. But again, they're not a nation. So therefore, it's not going to turn into a national business enterprise with resources that they can trade and do commerce. So that's why the black nation can't do trade and commerce with no other nation, because it doesn't exist. Although there is enough fiat that circulates with people that call themselves black, but they don't have the legal fact behind it to actually make it do what it's supposed to do. So that's why they manipulate the mindset of the people with the fiat so that they don't put the finances in the proper perspective. It's deliberately done that way on purpose. But back to what I'm saying, is trade and commerce is really where a nation has its highlights at. This is what prevents war. This is what stops war. This is what peace and friendship treaties come from. This is the result of a war. Look at what just happened with Cuba, where Cuba now becomes a trading post now for the United States. That's the big political move on why they want to do business again with Cuba. Although that they disagreed with what went on with Cuba, but they looked at the financial disadvantage the U.S. had with Cuba. So that's why they made an agreement to reopen those gates back up to do trade and commerce with them. When a nation is at war or at odds with each other, it stops the trade and commerce. And this is one of the political reasons why they denationalized Moorish Americans or Moroccan Empire to begin with. Is the very highlight of what we're talking about. So I think the people's interest in coming into this is wrong, because they're looking at things from a high perspective. Well, I'm not black, and you know, I have a nationality now, and you can't do this to me, and you can't infringe on me. And I really think that that's very important, but it's still lower level and it's elementary in the eyes of nationality. Because what do people that have nationality and always have one What is their civics? What is their curriculum? What is their teachings? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
They're taught totally different from us. We're taught from a being left back perspective. We come in having to go back to the basics just to be brought up to speed. Where they're more advanced, where they never had to deal with it. That was something, nationality, from the way we address it, is something that was learned in the household. There wasn't a separate school to teach that. There wasn't lectures to teach that. So I'm just showing how far off we are from what the real study should be.
Peace, more. I had wanted to, well, there's a couple of points that I want to make, but I'm going to go back to one of the original ones that I've been talking with Cujo in regards to black history representing, bleak history representing the European in effect. And in fact, what we are really suffering from is the fact that we are giving our energy to someone else. Black Power, Black Panther, all of that has power, had power, does still have power, but unfortunately it's not our power. So we're never going to own it. So in fact, Black History Month isn't for us, it's really for them to take from us. But yet we think that we own that because we're calling ourselves black. But of course, we're not black. So really, we're giving power to them. And then when you look at certain things that happen during these months, I think about it, they have Black Panther that just came out.
That was a big one.
They had another, they have, you know, the Oscars, all of these things, Super Bowl, all of these things, NBA All-Star, that was the other one. All of these things are done because the European really has no power. His power comes from us. So ultimately, the black part about it, there's nothing wrong with black. It's the fact that we're trying to own that black, and it's not ours. So really, it's like having a hole in our pocket that we keep putting money into, so it's really never going to come to us. So that, I wanted to ask you about what your feeling was with that, from that being black and us even trying to connect to any of that. And then secondly, I wanted to sort of respond to what Lanray here said about not needing community to the extent of just starting things off. To me, community and being part of a community is the key to everything. All of the communities that I see here that do well are ones where the community itself backs those products and goes to that. I just traveled through Chinatown, and as I was on the streetcar, about 20 so-called Manchurians got on the streetcar having bought all this stuff from their little area. So it's really the community that funds that. When you get to a point when you're Nike and then you've gotten beyond that, then you can become an individual that doesn't need to have your culture or community back you. But the beginning of all of this is community, and it's really the grassroots community that starts that all. So without that, and that's something that we don't have and never have. You go into our communities, and due to maybe geographical areas, people will support those industries. But because we don't have, like you're saying, that nationality, coming at it from a black perspective, the spirit of it has been tainted and eradicated. So therefore, nothing good can come out of it. Islam.
Yes.
So I know I went on a number of things. It was just you were. There was so much that you were saying that I had to write some of it down, but I was trying to sort of respond to all that, and I wanted to see where you were at with that.
No, Islam is all relative, though.
Yeah.
So to address the first point is dealing with language, words. We know words have power, interpretation of words, but just dealing with the effect of using the word black.
Exactly.
Like you said, there's nothing wrong with the word black as long as it's not misused. The energy is redirected into what it's truly supposed to be used for. Now, because we misdirect the energy and the use of the word, then we give it power. So I'm all with you on that, and that's what's been done for so long. And part of what we're doing is trying to counteract those energies. So we're fighting different levels of energy, physically and metaphysically. I mean, that's a mouthful within itself.
Right.
By correcting the term black in Black history helps us counter-react the usages of the word and the energy and the finding, like you were saying, like on the back end of it, how the European is financially capitalizing off of the misuse of the word. Regardless of how a person feels about the word or not, they're financially taking advantage of the misuse of the word, the improper usage of the word. So therefore, like you said, this month, this month so-called is dedicated to the Afrocentric mindset. But who really benefits off of the so-called Black History Month, like you were saying? It's really not the Asiatic or the Afrocentric community that's really benefiting from it. It's the back end, is the ones who implement it. It's the Europeans that capitalizes off of the programs and the things, even for example, what we're doing, we have to counter-react off of the energies as well, dealing with manipulation and sorcery. But the channel that we on now, we're doing this because we feel obligated to do something and get the word out to do something. But at the same time, who's making the finance off of it? So I'm right with you there, and they set up the programs where you can have your venues, but they're capitalizing off of more science, more than we are. All of these programs that we're doing, if we got to go get a building, who owns the building? If we renting space to do a lecture, who owns that facility? Who's getting that finance? Just all across the board, just the information vast on the internet. Look how much it costs to have a domain name and to have a server and to have the internet. I know here it's probably like $75 a month just to have internet service. So just look at how much finances goes in to our demise by just utilizing the little resources that we have that we don't control and we don't own. So I know I'm jumping a little bit too, but it's all relative to what you're saying. That we're really, when you really start to examine our condition, it goes a lot deeper than we ever thought it was. And even though we think we're doing good, sometimes we got to re-examine that on the level of good that we're doing.
And yeah, I wanted to also expound on that, because this was another thought that I had as you were speaking before. My interest comes from Nihon, or Japan, and I had been thinking back to when she had told me that in Japan, people don't lose things. So for example, if you're in a department store and you drop your purse, the next person behind them picks that purse up and brings it to you. There's no theft in the, not to say that that hasn't sort of maybe been corrupted now, but there weren't concepts of theft there, because culturally they were raised, and this to me is what I thought about where our major problem is through the Black cultural part of it all, is what does that represent? And that's something that I've been trying to work towards about what Moorish culture really means. What does that mean at the heart of it? So for example, in Japan, as I said, if some man has lost something, the next man behind him picks it up and goes and gives it to him. There are things like theft in those things. So to me, it really is inherently from the culture and what you're being taught in the home. So ultimately, if you are taking on someone else's persona, i.e. the European who was the true Slav, who somehow miraculously too used his energy with our science to then overcome us, and we've now flipped spots with him, and we're taking his energy to destroy ourselves. I've realized that until we can come to a cultural cohesion, we're going to have major problems, because ultimately, what does being a Moor really stand for? And so exactly what you're saying in terms of the so-called entertainer, and I thought about this too, because interestingly enough here, they've now started to push Black Movie Month and all this kind of stuff. And I start to think these guys, and they had this one blurb of a sprinter who they said he was the first sprinter, Carl Lewis, whatever, this is going back 60 years. And I thought, these guys are going to run into trouble, because ultimately they've done such a good job at decimating our culture. Who are they then going to be able to then use as a as a template for us to then emulate. Because you may have Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, but even those people, when you do the real studying, you realize that most of those people were agents, or at least corrupted. So ultimately, they have also, and this is where I think the prophet knew these things, they have also ultimately backed themselves into a corner and created a major issue that is really going to be the linchpin that is going to create the fall for them. Because they have given us nothing. And they've made sure that there was nothing that we could hold on to. So ultimately, we are then going to be able to build ourselves back up well, we're going to need to build ourselves back up without their interpretation of how we are going to build ourselves back up, which is what they've been trying to do from time.
True. Islam. Yeah, you really hit it on the nose. It's all about dealing with self, the lower self and the higher self.
That's right.
You know, what it really all comes back to, because you deal with things on an energy level, there's no him and there's no me.
That's right.
You know, there is no they. You know, there is no European, there's no Caucasian, there's no African, etc. When you take it to that level, then it's love and hate. That's it. Higher self and lower self. And going back to just dealing with civics and the physical aspect of the problem that we really first started talking about, the enslavement of us, of the Asiatic of North America specifically, has just been taught his lower self. He's been taught how to hate. That became the culture.
Wow.
Now the name black just fits or correlates with the culture that we've been bred to believe. But the word black is really irrelevant when you erase the term itself, regardless of what you call the people or what they call themselves. If the lower self tendencies or characteristics are still there, it doesn't matter what you call yourself. You're still economically distressed, you're still enslaved, etc. So therefore, back to the original teachings of Prophet Noble Ali, he taught us how to love instead of hate, where once the culture now is returned back to its proper place, we call it Islamism, which we refer to as the old-time religion, the religion of peace. You know, once you start going back into what that really means, then that's when we really can take the proper place again on the planet. You know, so nationality has to be taught from that spiritual application of things in order to reverse the karma and reverse the deeds that's being done here in society.
And the sorcery.
And the sorcery, absolutely. Because the sorcery, again, is not necessarily something someone's doing to us. It's something that we're doing ourselves through disobedience and through the lower self.
Exactly.
So the word black, to what it represents to the European nations, to the pale skin nations, everything that's being done to us that we feel is negative is only being done because of how we view ourselves and how we deal with ourselves on that level. And that would cease to be when we return back to our proper state. We're the only ones that can control that. You know, so that's like going back to where it needs to be, but really, you understand, that's for those who are in the know, that really to have the power to correct that just comes through learning self, you know, which is not an overnight process for ourselves and for a community. You're talking about getting a whole community at that state. That's what we're really up against. Those nations you made reference to have been breeding that in their children for generations. So therefore, it's a lot easier for that society to live off those type of standards and those laws. Well, here is not like that. We're learning about that from an individual perspective, and we're scattered with that. For every household, how many people, I mean, let's deal with our community. How many people within a square mile of where you're at or where you live that people think like you and is on that level from a so-called black perspective. Not talking about the other nationalities that live there, but just from our people. How many people like us can we galvanize together that even agree with what we're talking about? It's very low. So we're not at a community perspective yet. So that's how far off in nationalism that we are. We're Moorish Americans scattered makes up a community. And it's a lot of Moors out here. But we're so scattered in miles, distance, territory, that we collectively make up a community. But that's not good enough. The communities need to be more concentrated into our local areas where we can have our own schools, have our own convenience stores, where we don't have to be so broad in jurisdiction in geography to deal with one another.
Islam, I just wanted to cut you for a second. I think the other big part of it, because in terms of getting onto this level of knowledge, I've started to build with a lot of people, and there's a lot of commonality, but I realized what the COINTEL operations have done is they fractionalized it all through making slices. So I'm talking with an NOI guy who sort of agrees with me, but can't give up his sort of little doctrine to agree to the whole. So on top of it, to me, it's the spiritual side behind the national. We can all live in an area, but we're going to be Catholic, Christian, whatever, when, like you say, we're just humans. So to me, it's an even deeper level behind the sort of psychology behind what we think we stand for, and the fact that we can't then give up, because I think that's what we all here seem to deal a lot with, is having people sort of agree to the concept of it, but not being willing to want to give up for the greater good of the community, because they're NOI or they're 5%er or they're Nations of Gods on Earth or whatever it is. And so to me, you realize that it's not the physical part, it's the mental part that really, and we know that, is really what is keeping us apart.
Absolutely. I agree with that. So, I mean, what suggestion in moving forward, let's again, we use the word nationality. And it really, everything we're talking about deals with nationality. That's a very vast terminology. So at what point do we really start talking about that and implementing that into the curriculum? If you're going, like we're talking about these things, but on YouTube and most of the lectures you hear and the debating, how much of this conversation you really hear about?
You don't.
And I think that's one of the major problems, that we don't talk about it enough. So it doesn't set a standard for people to really address it. We don't force ourselves into what we're talking about. We can acknowledge it, but where do we push ourselves to do that? Where do we support one another to encourage that individual to step out and set up that grocery store, or set up that bank, or whatever it is we're talking about? At what point do we encourage and push people out to do that? You know, so I think that has to be implemented in the teachings of nationality from the early stages. So a person can know where their direction needs to be, so they don't misdirect energy in the wrong direction and use it for good to focus on what really should be done. You know, the prophet spoke about that we welcome into our fold men and women of all occupations, trades and businesses, etc. So he was encouraging, the level Drew was on, he was encouraging people who already had businesses to bring their businesses into the fold of the Moorish community. He was encouraging people who have not yet had businesses to start businesses. You know, these are the early teachings of Drew Ali that is left, you know, I'm not saying left out like nobody deals with it, but meaning that it's not encouraged enough. That from each community where we're at, it needs to be encouraged that we need to set these things up ASAP. If we're going to have a community, then this is what we need to do. Because if not, we're still taking that dollar somewhere else. You hungry? You want a bottle of juice or whatever it is? Where are you going to take that dollar? That's what it comes back to.
Well,
And I think if we establish that even more, I think the youth will be more encouraged to participate in our way of thinking, in our concept, in our culture, in our organization. If they physically see more things operative, I think we'll get more of a response. And not just them, but from celebrities and whoever else. And the attention of, because remember, we know we're dealing with fiat, Federal Reserve notes. But it still represents your energy level and your defense level. And those who, as a reference, have studied Sun Tzu, The Art of War, you'll understand that war is all about finance. And it takes finance to go to war. And that's usually what determines the winner is, who has that more financial stamina. I mean, as far as artillery and all that has a place as well, but who can go the distance? And that's where it has come to nowadays, especially on this metaphysical realm that we're dealing with, because you gotta have the energy to fight. We were talking about doing these lawsuits earlier and things of that nature. The lawsuits take energy. That'll drain you out. The time is put, especially because we're not groomed in the language. We got to study a lot of the language. We get bombarded with documents that we have to reply to within a certain amount of time. That takes a lot of your time. It takes a lot of energy, and things you might not know how to respond to, you now got to go study to find out what to respond to or what to say. So in order to do that, you got to have time reserved to do that. If you're working all the time and caught up with other activity, it's not a good look. I've been there and done that. So just looking at the energy that we're speaking about in finances, if we have businesses and bigger income, it gives us more energy to fight. And they know that. So they know how far they can draw you out. They pretty much can estimate the distance that you're willing to go. It's all based on your financial background.
This is common sense. It's all common sense.
And then they're controlling the finance, so that they can then turn it up or turn it down. But one of the other things I've really seen within our community is the fact that most of us don't want to support our own communities. To me, that's really where it's at. We would prefer to go support a European and go give him $1 than give our brother $1. To me, that is where culturally it comes from. Until we can, that's where the self-hate is so intrinsic. The self-hate, the reflection of that, is such that we can't love ourselves because of the sorcery that's been put upon us.
Islam. Yes, that's correct. So all of that has to be reversed in order to appreciate, the support of one another. The historical leader's message to America by the Prophet Noble Drew Ali addresses that very same subject matter. And that's why most businesses fail, he said. It's from the lack of support, the lack of patronage. And that's the slave syndrome, like you just mentioned. So again, this is why when we learn about who we are, about our forefathers and everything, that has to simultaneously be taught to us so that we can start to put our energy where it needs to go properly. And I've seen this over the years, that Moors are misdirected on where they're going with nationality, and this, it's like the spinning wheel, the jogging in place, where we keep addressing the same thing. Because we're not listening to Drew's true teaching. We keep dancing around the teaching. And I'm just saying that collectively, not any individual here. But this is how we came in. We're seeing what other Moors are doing, and we're using that as the baton to move forward, and that's usually what we do. That's why they say birds of a feather flock together. So we get caught up into a realm of what we've been taught to do, and that's a form of a program, and we carry out that program. And if you look at it 100 and some years later, we look at what Drew's program was. We're more advanced now, like we discussed. We got the internet. We got all these things at our fingertips. And we go back to what Drew and them was doing in 1920s, where they didn't have any of this that we're talking about, but they did a lot more. Well, with the little that they had. And we got to examine that. That's a real issue. You know, and again, this information don't sell, and this doesn't get the hits and the ratings, so most people on YouTube don't want to address that. You know, but really, this is part of the problem, and COINTELPRO capitalizes off of what people misunderstand Drew's program to be. So he will promote the lower self. I'm talking about the lower self, right? The lower self will promote the debating and the hatred type talk and the misinformed information of Moorish science. The lower self will put that out to their expense, where it won't cost the Moors nothing to put that out, because it benefits them more than it do us. But something that really benefits us more than it does them, they're not in favor of that. It'll be harder for you to put that out. Now you draw that up. Look exactly at what I just said and look at the dynamics of the program that Drew implement according to what was being done then and what's being done now. I have records, I have newspapers to show and prove the formula. I'm just dealing with a formula here. What was the formula of Moorish American in the 1927, 1928? What was the formula? What did they do when they received the nationality card? I got the minutes, I got the formula to that. They went out and participated in Moorish businesses in the community. The Chinatown that you were speaking about, they had a Moorish so-called Chinatown right in Chicago. They had one in Detroit in the early 1920s, and other areas too, but just dealing with Chicago because that was the Mecca. So that's where Drew Ali was doing most of his footwork at. So they had everything from a cafeteria to a grocery store to a cleaners, a laundromat for Moors. So you're talking about circulating the dollars. They were doing that in the 1920s. That so-called Black Wall Street that people keep talking about, the Moors had that in the early 20s. But how much do you hear about the Moorish Wall Street? Who talks about that? You don't hear the Moors talking about that, and you don't hear the opposition talking about that. That's the problem. So when the Asiatics from the Afrocentric perspective start looking at Wall Street, they're impressed with what Wall Street did with the Black Wall Street. That's quite impressive. But they don't know that it was something that predated that. They never even heard about that because the very own Moors don't want to talk about that. And most of them just don't even have that information. So again, Moors living in apartments or whatever, and they had to wash, they didn't have washers and dryers. Where did they take their clothes? They went to the Moorish laundromat. How many Moors knew that? They were hungry and they wanted to participate, they wanted to buy some food. Where did they go? They had a Moorish cafeteria. They had a local grocery store. I mean, it goes on and on. They had more business than that. They had a Moorish moving service. They had a Moorish furniture store. That's where we got our concept from, Moorish Express. There was a Moorish Express in the early 1920s. That's where we grafted the idea from. But the point is, whatever human needs to be addressed, Drew was capitalizing off of that and dealing with that and teaching the Moors how to create businesses. From there, that's how they got the city of Chicago's attention. They didn't just get the attention because a bunch of people walking around saying that they're not black. They got attention because of the businesses and things that they created. That's how they got all that national attention. And the mayors and the city councilmen and all of those people involved in what was being done because Drew was working on them simultaneously, getting them involved. You know, so again, that's how we start a community. The formula is already there. That will erase a lot of the problems that we have today, yes, the Moors got to work on their personal psyche and develop themselves where they're not dealing with the hatred. You know, that's one level that needs to be done from a human perspective. That goes without saying. I'm all for that. But again, until Moors get to that point, we still should have physical, tangible things that they can relate to. Remember, the lessons of the Quran says men comprehend the inner life by what they see and what they do. So a lot of people dealing with that, going into the astrology now, the sixth house, or the sign of Virgo, deals with the physical, material world. So when you're dealing with the house of Virgo, the Mary degree, or wherever you want to come from with it, most people in that realm comprehend by what they see and what they do. They're more physical. They relate to what their eyes, they relate by what their eyes can physically see and what they can physically touch. That's real to them. Where those people are usually less spiritual, that they can't really comprehend the inner life or deal. I'm going to tell you the opposite of the Virgo or the sixth house will be the 12th house, which is Pisces. So that's the opposite of the Virgo is the Pisces, and Pisces is the opposite. Pisces is more intuitive. Pisces is more spiritual. You understand? So that's where that whole Jesus degree comes from. So those people are less operative with their hands, and they're more dealing with their intuition, and they're more senses that can't be seen with the physical eye. But the age is not at that level right now. We're coming into that level. We're leaving that age, but we're not really there yet from the human perspective. So you got to deal with the degrees of what we're still dealing with, and that's the physical realm. People comprehend by what they see. So you have to really present things to them that they can relate to by what they can see. They got to see you doing good. Like us, we on another level. We know that the Moors is on a rise. We see it, but not just with the physical eye. We know all is well. We know what's going to be. We know that we're winning the race, but it don't look like that. You understand what I'm saying? From the physical eye, it don't seem like we're winning. From the physical eye, it don't seem like Moorish American is the thing to be, because people can't see the success. They can't see what the teachings have really done for the people. They can't see that. So from a recognition perspective, other nations don't see Moorish American as a nation of interest. They don't see them as a nation to be concerned with. So that's why there's no fear on what Moorish American is really talking about, because they don't physically see the production of it. It's only for the elite people that understands this on a metaphysical perspective that actually takes heed to what's going on in the Moorish movement. And most of its members is not dealing with it on that level. It's really a metaphysical movement. It's a divine movement, which we already know that is being said 100 times, but it's a divine movement. And we can't apply it the way we need to because we're still viewing the movement from a mundane perspective.
So, peace, brother.
Peace.
And Islam for leaving it off on that note with the divine movement, because I noticed that based on me hearing you speak, I was conjuring up nationality, nationalizing over naturalizing as you speak, you know. And with nationality, if we, the way I look at it, if we as Moors was teaching our children without the interjection of others, there would not be a need to explain divine movement in nationality. But in this day and time, it's as if when we're speaking of nationality, we have to exclude out divinity and things that are divine, and it really should not be so. However, even with musing the two into one, we have to be mindful that that takes every single last one of us, from old, young, teen, that takes all of us. And then when we're reminding of, we have to keep reminding ourselves of divine movement, that is the cause. That is the cause for the entire globe to make note of. So, with that being said, what is the standards for once an individual knows no longer black is not a nation and so forth and whatnot, then what is the standards? Should there be standards? Should there be certain protocols that certain men should be upholding, women should be upholding, to raise the children's mind state to comprehend, to be mindful of divine, and that this movement is divine?
Absolutely. You finished your thought?
I did. I have, yes.
All right, Islam. You know, and the question that you raised goes back into the program of the Moorish Science Temple of America. That's why it was created. It was from the beginning acts of the divine constitution and bylaws. You know, these are laws, these are acts, or acts is short for action. So these are actions for people to do, which if they practice these actions or do these actions, it changes their human behavior, it changes the way that they think. It's repetition. It's sort of like rituals. You know, they're rite symbolics. There's many different names for them. They're rites of passages. But the laws are not there to control someone or to have ownership over them, as some people might think they are, but they're there to help mold us into the character of a Moorish American. And not just a Moorish American, because, you know, we're really higher than that at right now. It's just dealing with humanity, like we spoke about. You know, it's another lesson behind Moorish and humanity. You know, we can cover that at another lesson, but humanity itself has to be uplifted from the unwholesome depths of poverty. You know, so therefore Drew directly targeted the Asiatics of North America, because that's where a lot of the poverty of humanity, the disassociation, the disfranchisement, the branding, and all of the westernized thoughts that was put on us was done right here in this Northgate civilization. So he targeted it here the most. But at the same time, the divine constitution and bylaws, the general laws, all of the words that the Prophet has spoken, and the rules that he gave us within the Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America, additional laws. There's plenty of lessons, which the lessons are synonymous with the instructions. You know, and different people know them by different names, but they're instructions. Let's use that terminology for a minute. When you open the Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America and you go into these chapters, it starts off at the top by telling you that there are instructions to instruct. And then in the general laws, the Prophet speaks about the instructions for all Moorish Americans. You know, so he's instructing us, Asiatics, on how to unfold into being not just a Moorish American or Moroccan or Moabite or Canaanite, but being human, being a noble, being what we're supposed to be without the name. You know, we don't even have to stay on the word black too much. Yes, how do you address or know if a person really in their minds know that they're not black? Because the record says, what a man thinketh, so shall he be. All right, so black really expresses through their actions, through their language and through their culture. So when someone says, I'm not black, it's bigger than what they say. It means nothing with the word. It correlates to their action and their character. So when we talk, when the prophet really was teaching us that we're not Negro, black, or colored, or Ethiopian, he said because these names were given to slaves by slaveholders. So what is that really saying? When we understand that we're not Negro, black, or colored, Ethiopian, what we're saying is we're not slaves.
That's right.
Which means that slavery shouldn't be within our demonstration.
Right.
You understand? Our actions shouldn't be that of slavery. Our teaching shouldn't be that of slavery. Our culture shouldn't be that of slavery. Our economic condition should not reflect slavery. You know, so now we get into the dynamics on what black is representing and what it means to say. People are you know, for years, Moors have been getting away with saying, oh, I've been hearing this term, oh, I got that Negro, black, and colored off of me. Yeah, my name has been corrected. I'm not that no more. And they're missing the point. Well, that's just a first elementary protocol that should be done is by correcting the name. But the culture, the actions, the reflection of self has to follow that. The name is just the crutch to keep people off of you, to give you what we call a legal standing at law. The name helps you with that because name denotes possession. So that's just a crutch to help you defend yourself until you unfold. But after you unfold, the name is irrelevant. Like if you go to court right now, you're dealing with a higher jurisdiction as far as federal court, Supreme Court, international court, any of these higher venues. If you got a case, black is irrelevant in these cases, meaning that if your database only can prove that you're not black, but can't reflect anything else after that, you're in trouble. Because it really doesn't focus on that at all. These are court jurisdictions or venues that other nations go to. The general sessions that we speak about, the A1s and all of this, if we reflect this in our documents, in our court cases, and we're invoking that type of jurisdiction, then we are invoking what they call permanent character. So now if you're saying that you have this character, now you held according to that. By the physical people that you're dealing with in that courtroom and the ancestors, and angelically speaking. You understand where we're going with that? So now you're held to a higher jurisdiction other than the human state.
That's right.
This is where karma comes in at. So we can receive karmatic retribution by how we carrying out this Moorish movement. If we do things that's not according to the standard. So Drew Ali understood that. So he gave us these instructions, he gave us these laws, he gave us these acts to live according to them. Act 4 of the Divine Constitution tells us that by being Moorish American, we are part and parcel of this said government and must live the life accordingly. We must live the life accordingly. It's a must. And according to what? Not according to just what anybody says we should do, according to that standard that you made reference to. Each nation has what they call national standards. Now let's reflect on what that means. A national standard means the standard of that particular nation. Each nation has their standards. An example of a standard will be a constitution. Constitution represents a foundation. It represents pillars. It represents the structure of a people or of a nation. So that reflects the character of that nation. You know that nation through their national standards, i.e. a flag. Those who've been watching the Olympics over the past week, you will see that when the people come out, the first thing that they're representing is their national standard. What is their flag? So you know these people by their flag. What they're claiming to do is represent their nation. So you can see a flag and not the people, and you right away say, that's Moroccan, that's Algerian, that's Brazilian. That's what you're calling on is not the geographical area or territory. You're really calling on the character of the people. That's what national standards really represent. This is why Drew says that our flag stands for the specific grand principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. That's what our flag represents. Those are the standards of Moorish American. So for one to really rep his nation, he has to live according to those standards in a perfect world. Of course, we got to unfold to what that really is, but I'm just laying down a groundwork of where we need to go with this. You know, back to your original question. These are the standards of a nation. The flag, the Constitution, and whatever laws that reflects it. And the Quran is very important in the national standards because it reflects the character of that nation as well. You know, so if you go to other countries, especially Islamic countries, you have less of the wording of a constitution. Like here in the North, we're big on the term constitution. And we talk about constitution or laws, we start going to the acts of Congress or the written laws of a civic book. That's what they are. They're civic instructions. That's what a constitution is. So we're quick to make reference to that as what we call the supreme law of the land. But you go into other nation states, the Constitution is really pretty much irrelevant because their supreme law of the land is their spiritual book, i.e. their Quran or whatever Torah or whatever spiritual book that they use. That's really the supreme law of the land. And that's what they live according to. So when you start going into the nations and their laws and the 10 Commandments and what we spoke about earlier, how certain countries don't have theft, it's because they're going by their spiritual book, you know, and not necessarily their civic book. You know, a civic book will say if you steal, then you punishable to 6 months to 2 years or whatever. That's a civic penalty for that infraction. But you go to another country, you might get your finger cut off if you took that man's coat. You know, because that's a divine violation. That's not a civic violation. It's civic because you're dealing with people, but the first interpretation of that's a divine violation. So there's a big difference on how we view our laws here in the westernized world and how they do it in the East. And that also folds and molds us a community and a society where certain things people just don't do because it's not within the program. You know, here is part of the program, so people try in every scheme that they can. And they know that if they do steal, then, you know, it's a risk factor. And if they do get caught, the punishment is so minute that it's worth the risk factor. You know, and out in other countries, it's not like that, brother. The divine warning by the prophet speaks about, you know, being exiled and imprisoned. In other countries, you fail to live up to your national standards, you might be exiled. It's no jail. It's no 6 months. There's no community service. There's no probation to these things. They would take you out of here quick. You know, even down to families. If a family, like most countries, Islamic countries, the predominant census of the people agree to the same religion. It's not a melting pot. There is no First Amendment in these other countries. So maybe 90% of the country might be Islamic. So just giving that as a reference, that means that everybody there agrees to the Quran. Everybody dresses the same. Everybody believes in the same prophet. Everybody lives according to the same laws, etc. If a family member want to go outside of that religion or that custom or that way of thinking, they could be exiled. Just off of that alone. Where here you got freedom of religion. That means that the mother might have one religion and the father might have another. You know, that's not accepted in other countries. So automatically the culture of the household is going to be different. And the community is going to be different because of that. That's why I said that the First Amendment is still a lower law. As people look up to it as a higher law, it's a lower law. The fact that there's a First Amendment means that there's a problem in society. It's a result of slavery. However, we use it for our advantage. But it only exists because of the modern day society that created these laws.
Islam branch of nature. Brother is, just to recap, I've been narrating a few things that have been recirculating this conversation, this bill today. First, economic programs, nationality, as well as personal healing, whether that be mentally, spiritually, or in the physical. That being said, should an effort be made to updating current methodologies of more science being delivered or dispensed to maximize the effectiveness of the times of the day with the new types of technologies available? Next question will also be, should a effort be made in regards to economic programs, we're dealing basically on 4 major levels. We're talking local, national, continental, as well as global. So we have to look at our community, at the term community, within different aspects based upon what means we have at that time. So should an effort be made to tackle larger social issues or stay on individual issues? To give you a little, expand upon that a bit, when social, I'm referring to like things such as making some type of renaming of Black History Month to say Indigenous History Month, and hopefully using that momentum to galvanize those who may still be asleep, as opposed to the individual effort, which would be more of what we were discussing earlier with the virtual storefronts and being able to provide a needed necessity for the community. Or is it more of a combination where both have to be addressed at the same time with equal and genuine effort to be able to be successful?
That's a hard one.
If it was easy, it would have been done yesterday, right, Grandson?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not. We wouldn't even have to talk about it. Deacons, this is up. To try to go back a little bit into your question. I'm going to deal with the last question first because it's more present in my mind. Renaming the so-called month of Black History Month, I'm not sure if that should be an angle, because we don't call it anything as it is. Like, are you talking about trying to have it nationally called something different from the representative of government reclassification? Or are you talking about within us Moors trying to do something? Should we do it within ourselves? That would be my question before I can go forward.
Excellent question. What I was referring to, even though I don't subscribe to this, I know there are some that do, the Black Lives Matters movement. That was the brainchild of one person that at one time who put that out in some way, somehow, regardless of the outside influences, has become a international topic of discussion. if we look for social events or social causes that could then be capitalized in such a way to bring the issue to a global scale.
Again, back with the Black Lives Matter. Remember I said earlier that events that benefit the elites or the insurgents or COINTELPRO are going to get much more publicity and economic pushes than things that's more organic in nature. And that's one of the reasons why that took off to be what it is today. So it's not really hard to come up with something that has no substance and get that put across the globe. And I don't really think we're interested in that. Our job has always been of trying to put substance back into the matter. And that's where we face all of these challenges. So I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, but we can be more effective and innovative in what we're doing. So I do agree that we should come up with something, a better strategy of doing what we're doing to counter-react these things. I know Moors have put out shirts that said Moors Lives Matter, and then Moors have made speeches pertaining to that to counter-react the Black Lives Matter and those type of things. And they wasn't trying to go international with that statement, but just trying to counter what was done. So I think it's more of a defensive move that we're taking. I think we need to be more offensive in what we're doing and come up with innovative ways to push nationality out here and the importance of nationality and the political aspect of nationality back into what nationality really represents. Remember, other nations are already there with this term. But I think we need to force them more to acknowledge their obligation to what it really represents. Because if they viewed, give an example. I don't know how many of you actually seen the Brother Nationality that was on People's Court, floating on Instagram. Are most of you familiar with that?
No.
All right, so I just want to draw off of that for a second. You see when the person asked him, he says, I don't really see those hats around or see those people around or something. And he answered, he says, sure, you see them all the time. They're the branded Negro, blacks, and colors. It's just misplaced. So my point is I'm making on that is I think we need to hold people more to their obligation to acknowledging Moorish American for what it really is. And regardless of Moorish American, not referring to people of melanated color to be called colored people. If people view them as free nationals or nationals of the human family, it will force them to come up with a name for the people. Even though we don't want them to come up with a name, but their attention should be, who are these people really? When you force them to identify them and address them for who they really are, it will force them to look into what are the possibilities or what are the options of who these people are, versus them being comfortable with just referring to them as black because they refer to themselves as black. Let's get with this. If they come out with a new driver's license that everybody got to go and renew their old ones and get these new ones tomorrow, everybody with a license got to go do that. If they say they changing the social security card around, everybody got to go change theirs. If they saying you got to come get this now and not that, it forces everybody to upgrade to what the so-called representatives or the government say that you need now to advance in this day of time. If the same representatives were forced to identify so-called black people by their proper identity, it will force people that don't know nothing about this to automatically agree with Moorish America. What I'm saying might be a little bit ruffled, but let me make it more clear. If the representatives were forced and the people at large was forced to look into the matter as who these people really are, it will force them to start calling them their proper name just by the attention being put on that. No different from if everybody was gung-ho about Obama in office. But if Obama really stood up or changed the census and says, you know what, my people are not black, don't refer to them as black, we're going to strike that off of the census classification now, you're going to call them Moorish American because that's their proper name. So none of these sub-agencies can no longer accept identity that says black on it. Look what would occur. People who don't agree that they're Moorish American now will automatically have to agree. You can't get food stamps or get whatever you need, Section 8 now, unless you agree to this. This thing will change overnight. Wow. So a lot of energy would not have to be put into the same thing we're talking about if we can address this in a proper jurisdiction and let the jurisdiction change this. Let's talk about jurisdiction and who has the role or authority to change this. According to the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. Congress is the one that was given the authority by the people to make a uniform rule to address the issue of naturalizations. At that time, naturalization and nationality was a fine line between the two terminologies. So they came out with the Nationalization Act of the year 1790, which is 1790, right after the Constitution was adopted in 1787. Congress was supposed to address naturalization then. They failed to do that. So years later, they dissolved the term the Nationalization Act and came out with the Naturalization Act. So to this day, let's deal with what's going on, even though naturalization is not for us. We understand that. But even for the people who are changing their nation state or their nationality, which they have a right to do so, and they're claiming to take on the status and the nationality of the U.S., which is a fiction, they're giving up a legitimate de jure nationality to agree to being a stateless person.
That's why.
So now, once they denounce their nation state that they came from, they have no nationality. Who's holding Congress to that responsibility of not changing the status of the nationals that's coming over here to this day, that even has everything to do with the deportation of the people that's being sent back right now. Everything has to do with the role of Congress. And Congress was the legitimate seat of our government to address the issues that we're addressing. They failed to do so, and that's the real reason, one of the political reasons why Noble Drew Ali came on the scene, is because Congress failed to do their job. If Congress would have did their job correctly, there wouldn't be a need for the nationalizations that we're doing right now, trying to get our names corrected, trying to get our proper name and our nationality on our document, which they're still not doing. They might correct your name, but they're not going to put your nationality on your documents, on your IDs, which they should. That would be proper. But they're still not doing that. So all these issues are still taking us away from, what really needs to be done. We're nationalizing people and we're giving them IDs and nationalization cards that say Moorish American. But really, it's only accepted through certain people, through a certain community. We can't get that nationally done without the assistance of Congress, which means that we need to be addressing these issues on a higher level to the seat of Congress. Congress should either acquiesce and let us do it and accept what we do through our administration, or Congress should say, no, that's our role to do. We're going to change that classification from the top up and get that recognized through all the agencies that fall under us. So you see how far we into this government, where we at now, that still has not been addressed. That was 1797 when this was adopted. 1790 when the Bill of Rights came. It's so-called 2018 and still not being addressed. It's getting worse. That they're coming, the National ID Act, which they call it, is going to be fully enforced within the next 3 years. Mandated.
Yeah, I've seen those signs posted in airports across the landmass.
National Identification Act, yeah. She's coming. She's coming.
And just to bring you up to speed, because I don't know what they're doing out there, but certain states, not nation states, but certain states like New York State, New York City, have already changed their driver's license around. Anyone who's receiving a driver's license right now, they put in big bold letters at the top of it, not for federal purposes.
Yeah.
And what that means is that the driver's license can no longer be used for a federal agency, for identification by a federal agency. It only has recognition on a state level. But it's not fully enforced until, I believe, next year or the next 2 years. So right now it's a case-by-case basis where a person with that driver's license can go to the airport right now. The airport is a federal jurisdiction. They still can use the license as we speak to board an airplane. But within the next 2 years, when it goes into full effect, they can no longer use a driver's license to board a federal, or to get on a federal, board a federal agency, or to use for a federal purpose, as far as an airport. Certain agencies are federal, certain are state. So the state New York state agencies will say, yes, this is fine, I can accept this. But a federal venue will not accept that. Border control will not accept that. Any type of federal jurisdiction is not going to affect that. Even Social Security will not accept it, because Social Security is federal and not state. So again, that's what I meant, is getting worse. It's not getting any better, it's getting worse. So the longer we acquiesce to who's supposed to deal with these issues, the more that it's a disadvantage, and more it affects the nation plural, and more does it affect the Moorish American who's trying to work to fix this issue. So we got a lot of things that need to be corrected. I don't really think we should focus on like far as the name of the Black History Month and those things. Like, we're way past that right now in my
I just use that to put a social theme issue to see if that could be used as a galvanizing cause, basically. But
I understand. I agree and I understand. I just think that, again, I think we need to come up with an innovative solution to address the Negro problem.
Absolutely.
More than what's being done. I think it's 2018 in this calendar. And again, there's a lot of years that we've been dealing with this information that we have not been able to put brakes on what they're doing. It's getting worse. So I think we should put more, from the person coming in, just nationalizing to the people who's been in this for decades. I think it calls on the attention of everybody who's really committed to this to really step their game up and look for other ways to come in and put brakes on what Rome is doing. We have done a lot. We have done a lot of good, not taken away from everything that we've been doing. I think that we just need to step it up.
that brings up another question for me. Are you aware of any efforts that's been made with, say, the United Nations, Moorish Science Temple of America, and or like the Washita Moors for global reintroduction of the Moorish nation? And if so, are you at liberty to expand upon it if you are aware?
Can you give me an example? I can't really understand that.
Well, recently, going through UN's database, one moment, I'm sorry.
That's him.
You said going into the UN's database?
Databases, yeah, that they have available online. And researching different information on the Empress. You know that in '93 there was a ruling that was recognized by the United Nations as the Moors being the oldest people of the world.
Yes.
Well, yeah, the Moors have used that within recognition in different court cases and things of that nature, but just like anything else, that would be considered a landmark case in my eyes. You know, what the Empress did in '93, which is real paramount. And, you know, even the case we did has a whole different angle, but just as an eye-opener and as a study civic lesson, those cases should be studied just as civic lessons. But as far as them being used for landmark cases, it's going to lack the recognition because the rulings of them wasn't worded where they can be used for that purpose. Because again, they're not going to do something that favors us. So what they did was very strategic with the Empress case in '93, to the point where they even granted her certain rulings over land. They was even paying for certain utilities, public utilities that was set up on her land. But far as it being public, where you can really research that and use it, it's hard to get that information because they don't make it available for more. They want to make this a discretionary. They try to turn a fact into a belief. So what they do is, we know that a lot of these things are facts that we talk about, like nationality is a fact, Moorish American is a fact, but they will convert that into, that's your belief, that's your religion, that's your religious belief. And as long as something could be viewed as a belief, it becomes opinionated. It becomes discretionary on whether somebody acknowledges it or not. And that's why they deal with us on a case-by-case basis. So there's been a lot of Moors that won cases in the court, which is never going to get the recognition because they don't rule it that way. They look for ways to sweep it under the rug and grant them certain things without making it a landmark case that one can use as what you call case law.
Right.
You know, and a case law is a law that has to be acknowledged by every court of record. You know, so they're not going to grant us any case law which we can use it like that. You got to become adept to use a Moorish case because you got to go and take bits and pieces out of there to prove a point. But you can't use the whole case as a case law. To say, well, I'll stand my ground on Moorish Science Temple versus U.S. Just throwing that out there. There won't be a case that they won't allow that, regardless of how right you are. They're not going to allow that to be black and white, where Moors can just use it, because that means that they got to turn in their card and button, and they pretty much got to just get up and turn over the seats to the proper people, and they don't have no interest in doing that anytime soon. You know, and that discourages a lot of Moors from this information because they think that they don't see no light at the end of the tunnel. They think this opinionated, they laugh at it, they say, oh man, I told you that stuff wasn't true. You know, look at what that European said about that. And that just shows that they don't really understand what they're working with. You can't expect, even cases they did that we used, like look at case law. Supreme Court already ruled that the lower courts are unconstitutional. Higher courts already ruled that everything we're talking about, there's a case law that backs up what we're talking about. But you take that same case law that they already ruled on, and it's really case law. You try to use that and they act like they don't know what you're talking about. They're still not going to let you win on a case law.
That's true.
You know, that's really the sad part. They'll just come right out and tell you, you know, well, we can't help you. Now, I was told by the director of DMV here in New Jersey, when I argued the Dred Scott case with them, they said, you know, you're right, but it's still, they're not going to let you win. He said, I couldn't explain it no better, but he said, I'm telling you, they're not going to let you win. To the point where he questioned, why did I want to continue with this information? Like, they're not going to let you guys win, pretty much. Like, you're going down a dead-end street, even though you're right in fact. What you're saying is absolutely right. The history, the law, where you guys are coming from, you're right. But still, it's like a suicide mission is what they're saying. Why do you want to pursue this suicide mission? Is what they're really questioning you. And they pretty much said the same thing, in other words, to Prophet Noble Ali in his earlier days. And they told him, they said, giving niggas back Islam is like trying to put a pair of pants on a horse. You know, so it comes like the same statements. Yes, sir.
With regard to, like you were saying, you know, the Europeans would be taking these case law and making it appear to be frivolous. Now, there's also Moors that take that position of siding on that angle. And then you made reference to you know, cases like what you had in 2006 or whatever, that Moors should be using those to study. Now, what perspective should they be looking at the case laws and such, if they're going to look at it in that fashion? Because as far as the campaign to keep the people passive, your case is one of the cases that they use frequently to show, you know, quote unquote, this doesn't work. But we know, like with a Moorish mind, these people who are in the seats of power aren't gonna put it on the record in that way, so Moors can use it later. So how should cases like yours, other cases, be looked at by Moors who are, you know, thinking about stare decisis and using case law as a reference point, whether they're writing writs or whether they're using it to teach people that, you know, just like you're saying, these people know that we're right, but they're doing things opposite to make it seem like we're wrong.
Islam to that. You know, and again, you know, as man unfolds, God unfolds. You know, man's God today, tomorrow is not God. So I said that to say that the case that we did in 2005, we actually started in 2003. It was hung up in the courts for a few years, something in that nature. Actually, that was the second case that we did. We did a case prior to that was thrown out as soon as it was filed, probably in 2002, 2003. So as trial and error, we looked at another angle just to get it on a courtroom floor, you know, and that was hard within itself, because the first case, I believe, was kind of tight, you know, and we filed it here in Trenton, New Jersey, and like 2 or 3 days later after it was filed, they sent it back saying that they're not even going to address it. It's dismissed. You know, so that brought me back to the drawing board. Okay, well, they're not even giving it a chance. You know, they're not even dealing with the issues at hand, and they're not even making it look good. They just telling you straight up, we ain't gonna hear this. You know, so I had to look for ways to even get it heard, to get it on the floor. I wanted attention to it. And I wasn't perfect, and I'm still not perfect. But this is just where I was at back then. I let my mental, what was in my mental, reflect on paper then. Everything in that case wasn't right. My interpretation of the laws was not advanced as like they are now. You know, but still at a minimum, it was enough that we were right and should have been addressed. Any more making a claim, regardless of how wrong he is in his argument, he still has enough fact in there that it needs to be addressed. You know, so I had to look at ways just to get it heard, just to get it on the floor. You know, and Moors give us very little credit just for that. You know, of getting it heard. You know, we took it outside the jurisdiction of New Jersey territory and took it to the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. You know, and I used the strategy of doing that just to get it heard because New Jersey had already dismissed it. So if we would have filed another case that was similar in the same courts of Supreme Court of New Jersey, they would have dismissed it again. So we had to come up with a cause and effect. We had to come up with different innovative ways back then to even justify crossing state lines and having it linger in that court long enough to get momentum. You know, and you had to get other higher officials involved so that they couldn't just throw it out without being reprimanded by a higher level other than them. So it had to make noise, and it had to make noise very quickly. So that was all strategies and tactics that was used. And I think that worked out very well, long as it stayed in the court. And things that transpired while it was in the court. Like we had attorneys reach out to us, wanting to interview us and get our interpretation. We had the press came directly to the temple to interview us on the case. So once again, you know, in publicity and just getting this stuff heard, you know, that's a big step within itself. That's outreach. That's getting the community involved to the point where all the local officials was waiting for the outcome of the case, just like we were. Because it was very, you know, man is truth and falsehood strangely mixed. So I will admit there was some stuff in there where we were off. We wasn't that learned in that we made an argument and maybe wasn't at the level where we can explain it the way it needs to be explained. But there was enough Drew Ali talk in there that they should have addressed that by itself. You know, so therefore it did call on the attentions of the newspaper and the attorneys that went to school for law, and even judges that wrote a response to what we have did and said that, hey, look, the Moors got a point. The fact that they said that in the newspaper, that the Moors got a point and it needs to be addressed. The fact that they said that, Moors should read in between the lines and say, hey, look, these Moors are on to something. In fact, Moors that knew more than us should have said, you know what, these Moors need help. Let me offer some assistance. Let me see if these Moors need assistance where we can fine tune what they're doing or get involved to make this go longer than what it went. We didn't get that type of feedback. You know, in fact, we got Moors that was against what we were doing, claiming that we wasn't citizens and, you know, we wasn't nationalized properly, and we wasn't in the right temple, and all these other mundane aspects that kept the case from going to the next level. That's what we encountered and experienced. So again, back to what I was saying, that they're not going to let a case become a landmark case where Moors can just use that. So again, they swept it under the rug. They did the best that they could. It took them a few years to do it. Come up with the little memo and response that they did. It took them a few years to write those couple of lines, which is, was pretty impressive for me. Again, my main purpose of writing the suit was actually for a civic lesson. I want to give the Moors a civic lesson and a template, for taking this to the next level. And I always said that I need someone to take this suit and perfect this suit and take it to the next level. So it was only meant really to be a template, so Moors can have a foundation to know how to write a suit, how to organize, how to structure a suit. How do you start it off? How can you get it across state lines? How do you remove a case from a lower jurisdiction to a higher jurisdiction? These things was done. That they can't take nothing away from. Even within their ruling, they can't expose the fact that this was done. So it was a pattern, so Moors can at least do that. And it has served as a template for lots of Moors all over the country that I had the privilege to share my thoughts of this case with. I've seen Moors rewrite the case, rewrite certain affidavits that was in it, the due process of law book. I've seen Moors fine-tune it. Even us, we went back through it and fine-tuned it. Brother Taj went back through it and fine-tuned it and reused a lot of stuff and put it back out there. Into the modern day affidavits that you see out there now, like the affidavit of fact and things that Moors are using, a lot of it stemmed from what we have done back in 2003 and even prior to that. So it created what we have today. And it created what a lot of Moors are doing today. Some of them are winning on lower level, lower cases with it. I know Moors that use the stuff we put in the suit on lower cases, lower courts, traffic courts, and beat traffic cases with it. Moors are dealing with different issues, different subject matters and jurisdiction, and had been winning. So it did help out a lot, and it did what I wanted to do, to serve as a template and a civic instruction to at least start the plebiscite, start the conversation, and use it as a foundation and take it to the next level. And again, it has been used for that, and it has worked. Some courts have laughed at it, and some Moors wasn't as successful. But I don't really think it's the document or the case itself that did that. I just think that's just Moors that just wasn't successful at defending what we have done.
So going back to what you're talking about in regards to getting those results in court, in those kangaroo courts. And I think for the Moors, I mean not for the Moors, for the undeclared Moors, the one thing they're looking for is those W's. Like, yeah, you won in court and whatnot, but I don't think people understand that when you tell the bully to come to the back of the school and you pummel him and then you come back out, the bully's still gonna act like a bully amongst the other people. But behind the school, he knows. So I don't think people understand that. Like, numerous times in court cases, even before the case was over, I'm seeing the court scramble. I'm seeing people scramble, all because of what I'm standing on. And it has not. And I didn't get an official W. But what they're looking for is a way to get out. Because once you declare your nationality and go into this court, they're always trying to find a way to get out. And a lot of times, our people can't even speak. Like, we could speak amongst each other, but we can't even speak. You know what I mean? So that alone is intimidating for our people, you know? So going into the courtroom and seeing them being intimidated, they get spook easy. They get spook easy. So without us getting those factual W's in the kangaroo courts and lower courts, a lot of these undeclared Moors don't get it. And I don't think they'll ever get it, you know?
Yes. And that's another thing, just dealing with the encouragement of people. You know, that's a lot within itself, that we got to put courage in people's heart to even want to pursue this matter. I'm not talking about the courts, but just defending themselves. You know, just like Bob Marley, you know, sung, stand up for your rights. You know, just regardless of what nationality you are. You know, rights is being violated in every jurisdiction, in every nation across the land.
That's right.
You know, every nation has suffered slavery, like Drew said. So, you know, just generally speaking, stand up for your rights, your human rights, your divine rights, your substantial rights, your inalienable rights. People need to have courage to do that. And I think the Moors Divine movement plays a large role in that. It gives people courage to stand up and fight because it gives them a leg to stand on. You know, some people really know, everybody knows that they're under occupation and things are not right. They know that they're under a form of slavery, but they don't have any ammunition to fight with. You know, if they're coming from a Negro, Black, and colored state of mind, their experience is the only thing that they know. So they don't have the courage to fight because they don't think that they have anything to stand on. So that keeps people from not standing up for their rights. So I know it did it for me. The Moorish movement gave me the will to fight. It gave me the courage to fight. It gave me something to fight for. You know, and I think that that's important, that when they see people like us that's fighting, regardless of how much truth is in it and how wrong we might be or how right we might be, it gives us a lot of courage, man. It looks good to see Moors fighting. You know, and that turns people on. You know, we all been in court, and like you said, we had people come up to us and say, man, I like what you're doing. Or, man, I need to know more about that. Or, y'all look good. Y'all strong. You know, they might not even have the background to measure what you're saying, but they in awe. They seen the courage you had talking to the judge. That takes courage. To stand up and tell that man that you not something, and that's not your name, and they violating this, and they got an oath to do that, that takes courage. And for starters, that's something that has to be developed within the individual. They got to have courage to do this. You can't address this without courage. That's for sure.
Big up everybody in this room for their courage.
Brother Nature, one of the things the Moors online, Moors who are frequent online, they have been witnessing this campaign. Active Moors are sovereign citizens. Active Moors are anti-government. And like I was saying earlier, they've even, like I was telling you in the week, they're even calling you in now, talking about people stole your Benz and all that stuff and you never got it back or whatever. For the people who study online, could you address them hearing or listening to naysayers talk negative about people who are active?
Yes, and based off of the definition and the spirit of COINTELPRO, like you discussed earlier, you know, man is not the body nor the soul. He's a spirit. So when you hear certain things out there, you're listening to a spirit. It doesn't matter who it's coming from, and it doesn't matter what they look like. But when you hear certain activity or certain messages of hate, then you know that that's an evil spirit that's moving. So regard not what group they belong to, don't associate that with an organization at all. You know, that's that individual spirit that's reflecting the Satan self coming out. You know, so that's why I don't really get involved with the social media and the internet. That's just not my cup of tea. I use the internet for good. You know, so I don't like to contribute to the falsehood that's already out there. I don't like to give it energy or momentum. You know, because I think that that's really what they promote and what they like, is for that stuff to get out there and gain momentum. because it's a distraction. So I try not to cater to that. That's why you said they try to bring me in it. You know, I don't, and I'm sure that I've heard little things. I hear stuff all the time, actually, from people who tell me, but I don't really go on there to listen myself or react to it, because it's just, it's indices of what the thoughtless think. You know, and I just don't think it's healthy for people who are not educated when they hear that type of stuff, because a lot of people don't like to hear that, because they look like we're divided. It looks like division. It looks like opposition. And it's something that, like I was talking earlier, people that's quote unquote might be more successful, to them it looks like a waste of time. They don't really want to come into something that seems like it's a bunch of confusion. So the less confusion it is out there, I think is the better, because we're trying to gain membership. We're trying to gain like minds to change their life around. So we don't want to put anything out there that's going to discourage them. COINTELPRO is going to do that by itself, regardless of what we do. So let them do that. But we don't want to add on to it. We don't want to become COINTELPRO agents. And I think that people are doing a good job out there of doing that. You know, and that might not even be their goal. And COINTELPRO don't mean that you agreed or you signed up like you're a supporter of that agency. The COINTELPRO agents are people who are indirectly carrying out their mission, and they might not even be aware of it. And so we got to identify that and sometimes intelligently tell those people, those that we might think are agents. Sometimes we need to give them a call on the side and let them know, look, man, this is what you're really putting out there. This is how it's really coming across the airways. You know, and with certain people that were putting stuff out there against me, I have done that. I addressed them directly on it. I just don't go on the airways and counter-react what garbage that they're putting out, because I think it's just a distraction.
Brother.
You trying to say something more?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Cool. Islam, yes. So, kind of pedaling back upon when you were making mention about your case.
Mm-hmm.
You know, praise be to Allah that He gave you the spirit for you to go and have the courage and do what it is and say what you had to say down in that venue. Do you think your approach that you had taken was not successful due to the fact that your confidence was feeding your ego, and that didn't have you to look back and see that you had to look more into your studies, or the fact that they didn't want to take in the divine truth, the facts that were coming from the truth that was coming from the facts that you was putting on. Now, I didn't see your case, I didn't hear your case, so I'm just bringing this based upon what you said and what I heard.
So you coming from the court's perspective or from my perspective?
No, I'm just bringing this across from the perspective of how I'm hearing it, and how I'm hearing it is, all right. Let me paint this picture like this, right? Now, I know myself, like when you read certain information of Moors is the founder of civilization, you come across that information, you get empowered. That builds your confidence. I don't care if you're not confident or not. That's going to give you confidence. Now, that knowledge, right, that knowledge that one gets, it's supposed to humble them more to study. It's supposed to humble themselves more for them to go and study, right? Now, if they have not yielded to those divine principles that has been displayed, you know, from the flag, then they're gonna be losing every time they go ahead and try to win every battle that comes across him. So, based upon your case that you had dealt with, did you find it wasn't successful because you felt like that you felt that you had to do more studies? You weren't where, as you made mention, you weren't where you were supposed to be. The state that you is now, you wasn't of that state before, meaning that you rose to a new degree. So are you saying that they didn't want to acknowledge the truth of what you put on the record, as well as your ego could not be kept in check by yourself?
No, let me clear one thing up. I've never said that the case wasn't successful. I'm saying that the case was successful, and that's part of the problem, that how the case is viewed differently by many people who read it. Everyone who has a different ear and has a different interpretation or understanding of law is going to look at it differently. You know, and for me personally, the case was successful because I've seen a positive, especially in my community, in my area here, I've seen a positive turnaround from that case. I've had actually one of the police officers that created the cause of action that was in that case later came back to me and pressed my hand and thanked me for the situation and apologized and says that they need to teach this to us when we come in. He says, if I would have known about this, then it never wouldn't have happened. As far as him stopping me and going through his protocols, which created a lot of that case. But that same individual says that because of the case, I did a lot of studying myself. This is his own words. He says, I did a lot of studying myself, and I understand you guys better now. And he says that they do not teach us this, and because of that, it sends us out here on our own. So just from one, if you can do something to change one individual, one person, then you've done a lot. You know, and that's not the first person that gained wisdom or knowledge or growth from the case. I myself, it made me a stronger person. You know, it made me personally a stronger person. You know, I know what I know now because of that case. It's experience, it's trial and error. But even going into the case itself, the case was successful on certain levels where the case got heard. It got the publicity that it needed. It got other attorneys in our area informed on Moorish American, those that might not even knew what Moorish American was. It was a civic lesson to law enforcement, where I was asked by 2 different municipalities to come and do law classes to their police officers. I gained relationships with the chiefs. I gained relationships with the sheriff. You understand? So it did a lot in the community just by us going through these trials and tribulations, regardless of what the Supreme Court judge said. You know, that's minute from what I'm looking at and what other Moors should be looking at. You know, to this day, the Moors in our community, I won't say they have a free ride because it's still a case-by-case basis, but they got an easier ride. You know, it's like I was the flunky, like I was the guinea pig, so to speak. You understand? So I went out and went through these issues just so that other Moors can have an easier ride, and it worked, and they did it. So more, they know what this is all about, where they're not quick to just mess with Moors just on GP. You know, they don't do the racial profile and just stop them. Even Moors today, they coming in, never even been to the temple. Don't even come around us and get these lessons and get the experience that we have. Moors that live maybe 2 blocks away. We call them YouTube Moors. Moors that go on YouTube and think they got the education now. And they go around here and try to exercise this even they don't have a rough time what they're dealing with because it's already, the wave already been paved. You know, so we already removed cases from the lower court to the higher court. They had to stop and stay their proceedings. They couldn't arrest us. They couldn't proceed with what they were trying to do. That part of the case we won. It was dismissed without prejudice, which means that neither party can bring the case back up, which meant that they had pending cases for us in lower courts that they had to dismiss. That's what dismiss without prejudice means. So some of the Moors don't know how to interpret the case, looks at it like we lost because it was dismissed, but they don't know what was dismissed. And they're trying to use it to just to feed their ego, to try to gain membership from their perspective, to try to make us look bad, so they interpret it the way they want, and that's what they want others to think. But they don't even know how to interpret a case. Just like last week, somebody was talking about my case online, and Moors trying to discredit us, talking about that I had a brand new Mercedes Benz, and that's what the case was about, and I got my Benz taken, which is false. I never even owned a Mercedes Benz. It wasn't even about a car, period. I had a truck. The subject matter when you're dealing with the vehicle that they talked about was a truck. It wasn't a Benz at all. It wasn't a car at all. They don't even understand. They wasn't even reading the case. You know, so it shows you that they're unintelligent themselves. So they're even talking about it if they got their facts wrong. You know, along with other things that they said as well. But one thing that I didn't hear them talking about the wrong statements that the courts was making. How come these Moors didn't make reference to the Judge Prater saying that Drew Ali didn't issue out nationality cards? He issued out passports to his members. Some things in the case that I might have done or said might have been off or wrong. But was it wrong deliberately? Was it sincerity in what I was saying? No. It might have just not me being that learned in that area yet. But the false statements that were made to denationalize us further by the judges saying that Drew never even issued out nationality cards. How come the Moors won't talk about that part of the case? Why they didn't do an opposition? We did it in our due process of law book and in the newspaper. We did a motion in opposition to the judge's statements. That means that everything that the judge said that was wrong, we went point by point and exposed that and corrected what they said. And we put that in the public newspaper. We spent our finances and put that in the newspaper. We did that it wasn't even about me at that point. It was about what they said, the statements and the jabs that they threw at Drew Ali in the movement, which reflects everybody who claims a part of the movement. We came to the defense of the Moors at large, not me. The case was dismissed without prejudice at that point, where we couldn't bring that particular case back up. So all the energy and the responses we did at that point was just civic lessons in general and the opposition just for the etheric realm. We came to the defense of Drew and our ancestors. But these Moors didn't do that. The same Moors that claimed that we were wrong and agreed with the court when the court said we were unintelligent, that's what the court said. But the Moors did not defend what Drew did in the case. They could have said, well, I disagree with Nature, I disagree with Taj, I disagree with Sheikah's Nika. They could have said that and said, however, the statements that they made about Drew is wrong, and I want to defend that. Did they do that? No. When they were interviewed, did they make statements in defense of Drew? No. Which means they acquiesce. Acquiescence means that you agree silently. Your non-response to the matter is acquiescence, means you agree. And that's where your agents come in at. Yes. So Moors got to really read the case because it's once again, it's a civic case, and I don't care how much law you know. If you read that case, you'll notice something's fishy about it. you could automatically read in between the lines and see that there's answers that need to be answered that was not answered. And that's what the attorneys said when they were interviewed and was put in the newspaper themselves. They said, we need to know how to proceed. So we're waiting on a response as well. Because a lot of things just needs to be answered. It's a gray area. So that should tell Moors a lot. Even if we wasn't the ones that can answer that, or make them answer that, it should be a green light for other Moors to pick up from that perspective and get those answers addressed. You know, so that is many ways to look at it, and that's again just how I'm looking at it. The fact that this was 2005 or whatever, for Moors to still be talking about it today, it must have had some type of impact on what they're doing, directly or indirectly. Even though they might not want to admit it. And I think that's the reason why they would even come on and start talking about it in the first place. They've been affected by it. The lack of membership from a lot of these temples and organizations, they were affected by it. The fact that people like the forums that we got now and what other people are doing, there's a lot of temples, there's a lot of groups out there that's challenging the opposition. A lot of that we had interest in. Even though we might not be doing it ourselves or out there online saying it right now, but a lot of that is by way of what we encourage them to do in the first place. And that's the whole point. You know, is to add on to the movement. The movement is kinetic energy, I call it. You know, so it's a divine movement. That means it's going to keep moving regardless of our input or not. We can't stop the movement. You know, and like Drew says that I brought you something, you know, that will tear you up. Well, he said, I brought you something you can't tear up. He said, it will tear you up. And that's what he was making reference to, this divine movement. We can only add on positively to the direction of this movement. But we can't take away from it.
That's true.
The fact that it's divine means that it's being guided by God, by a higher energy, by a higher level. We don't control the movement. So you can either participate and add on to it, but you got to add on to it from a divine perspective, or else you're not going to be able to keep up with the momentum of it. And that's what he meant, it'll tear you up. You try to jump in the movement of something and you don't have that same momentum as what created it, then you're going to be underneath it. And that's just dealing with science. That ain't dealing with my interpretation. If there's a stampede going on down the street and you jump in the middle of the stampede, but you're not going with the flow of the stampede, what's going to happen?
It's going to tear you up.
You know, and we take that to a metaphysical level, that's what's going on. You know, by certain Moors that want to get in the middle of something, but can't deal with it.
You got about 15 minutes left. I have two more questions.
Yes, sir.
One question was relative to how come you have Great Seal before your Moorish Science Temple and others don't? And the second question was where should Moors be looking at their studying being moving forward? Like from this point on, like what should be the focus of the study for Moors who are into studying?
Actually, then I have one final question for you as well.
Islam, Moor, no problem.
All right, Islam, so I'll address those first. As far as the angle of study, I mean, I think we just need to put more time into our studying. And I think and again, that can go into different areas, because when you're speaking about which Moors are you making reference to? You know, you talking about us? Are you talking about you all? Are you talking about Moors that's just coming in? What should be their direction? But I would just give a general statement that would address it all. You know, the study of self. You know, we cannot stop studying self enough, and the necessity and the need to study self is really the order of the day. You know, so the study of self. You know, the prophet says, if you ask me again what to study, I'm gonna tell you, go back and study yourself. You know, knowledge of thyself, and he who created thee. Said, what else is it that man needed to know? I know. So we can't go wrong with that statement, is what I mean by that. The study of self applied to all of the other doctrines and the literature and the information that's given to us. The study of self should always be in front of everything else we're doing. As long as we got a foundation, we can go into any book, any literature, any nation's doctrine, and just pull out the science of it, because we already have a foundation. And this is what was good about the Moorish Science Temple, because Drew, within the literature of the Moorish Science Temple, will give an individual a foundation. You know, he'll give you a sure foundation. Once you got that foundation, now you can go into something else and not be misdirected or distracted, because that foundation is there. You cannot be shaken. You know, they call it the rock on which man builds himself. If you don't have that rock, then you're going to be beneath that rock. You're going to have no foundation. You have no understanding. And if you don't have no understanding, then you can fall for anything. You know, and that's what it really goes back into. You know, the information that we're giving our people. I always give individuals the Prophet's literature first, meaning the Moorish Guide, the Quran, or the Moorish Science Temple, that is. You know, and the literature that he gave out. I give that to individuals as a foundation. I say, you study this, understand this, and you can't be gained by what's out here. Then you'll know who's who. You can't be fooled, you can't be bamboozled, you can't be tricked into somebody's program. You will know exactly what the standards are and what they should be, and you measure every Moorish American by what's in these books here. That's how I start off explaining this to someone. Then from there, as they get a foundation, then I can recommend or introduce other literature to them, other books. Like if they got a specific area of expertise that they need to know specifically, if it's about taxes, if it's about traffic tickets, if it's about other issues, health, diet, whatever it is, then I can recommend something specific to that area that might not address that in the Moorish literature. But I at least try to give them a foundation first. You know, and for those who already have that foundation that's into it, then you already know what to do. You know, you already got a foundation, and you can address different subject matters as you need to, you know, according to whatever the subject matter is. You know, it's all relative, it's all related, and it's all gonna still stem back to self. You know, whatever can make you a better individual from self. Learning the mechanics, the anatomy of the body, knowing self, knowing where we came from, what created the physical, the lower self, the higher self, knowing the constitution of the body, because the constitution of law that we talk about in the courts is all symbolic of the physical body. You know, so if you know the body first, if you know the makeup of the body, which is the true constitution, then you can ace the court system. Then that is much easier to learn after you learn self. You know, I learned it kind of like, you know, different ways coming in, back to your original question about why is Great Seal at the front of the temple now. You know, and it's because when I myself came in, I came in under the teachings of the Great Seal National Association of Moorish Affairs. So that was my upbringing, that was my school of thought, that was my rock of foundation. You know, so the momentum of the studying, like I told you, we used to go to the library all day. You know, we went out and bought telescopes. We used to go outside 2 o'clock in the morning and study the stars and measure them according to the astrology books. We used to read references of Llewellyn George, you know, people like that of astrology, that was the momentum of study for us. So we that's all we knew. We came in and jumped right into that momentum. And you start to hang around Moors that has that momentum, then you're forced to keep up with that momentum of study. Versus if you get with Moors who don't study that much or that vast, they only stay in one book, then that's going to be the capacity of their study, and it becomes your capacity because they're not pushing you to a faster momentum. You know, so again, it's the soil that you must be placed in so that you can grow apace. So the soil or the soul, again, I reflect that to be the Moor Science Temple because that's the soil that I recommend. I think that's the proper soil that one should be in. It's just they need that proper Moor Science Temple. They need that vast Moor Science Temple with people like yourself and other people around the country that's studying on a vast level, because that momentum is what helps you grow. So the Great Seal Association of Moorish Affairs was really the umbrella that I came in under before I really was taught about Prophet Noble Jew Ali and what the Moor Science Temple was all about. You know, that's all I knew. So I studied on that level, and I was actually having chapter meetings and a leader from our territory here in Jersey under the Great Seal National Moorish Affairs. So that term Great Seal, we was already having meetings and chapter meetings under that name, under that particular charter, prior to coming into the ranks and the chambers of the Moor Science Temple and going that route. So we were all, our membership, our identification, our documents already said Great Seal on it prior to us coming into the Moor Science Temple. So I was already a head leader, or what they call an emir in that language, in that jurisdiction. The leader is called the emir of that particular territory. The Grand Sheikh will be similar to the emir in Great Seal. So because I was already fulfilling that role and sitting in that seat and already had an active membership at that time when I came into the Moor Science, because that momentum was already with me, most of the temples and the Moors that was from the temple did not want to agree with that type of momentum, those type of teachings, those lessons. So we didn't come up under their authority because of that, because they wasn't in agreement to what we were teaching. So we had to go with our self-autonomy to teach what we wanted to teach at that time. So did go through the Grand Sheikh, the Moor Science Temple of America protocols. Went through the chambers of the Moor Science Temple, of the Adab Chamber, and went through the minister degrees and all of that good stuff. And did what I had to do and to become the Grand Sheikh of a Moor Science Temple. I just did not accept the charter that was given under the traditional charter, under those particular jurisdictions that you have out there today. We didn't receive that at the time. We agreed to change the temple's name to the Great Seal Circle 7 Moor Science Temple of America. And that was the name that we used in the beginning to keep that momentum going. So we dealt with that for a few years until we corrected the name or changed the name or amended the name to Moor Science Temple of America, Temple number 10. Because the reason why we changed it to Temple number 10 is by studying the Prophet's movements. We realized that the temple that he put in New Jersey was temple number 10. That was the temple that he put in Newark, New Jersey. And because the prophet's temple, the vast movement that he was teaching was not being done in New Jersey, the only temples that was in New Jersey was under the reincarnated temples. So there wasn't no temple number 10 at the time we started our trying to clean up the Moor Science Temple. We reinstituted the Moor Science Temple number 10, which is the prophet's temple that he set up for New Jersey territory. So that's why we adopted that name, as to pick up the momentum of where he left off and put it under the proper terminology of the Moor Science Temple, having a temple number of identification. Because then a lot of Moors were saying at that time, oh, there's no Moor Science, there's no Great Seal Moor Science Temple of America. The prophet ain't used that terminology, which they're right. He did not use that terminology. But we used the terminology again to get the momentum of what we needed to do at the time, and to give other temples the courage to come out from underneath those that was holding them bondage and didn't have the freedom to speak and deal with the other lessons. We also gave them courage by doing what we did, for them to think outside the box and say, hey, look, this can be done. There is another way to deal with this Moor Science Temple, and people started to change how they were doing things from their charters and from their temple perspective. And it started a new regime of the Moor Science Temple. It started a new movement within itself. So I think that had a place that corrected a lot of things and brought us to where we at in 2018, so-called speaking, where you got a lot of temples out here now that's not under those jurisdictions and are dealing with a lot of information that you wouldn't have seen that back in the day in the Moor Science Temple before we brought that to the Moor Science Temple of America. Islam.
Wow.
Well, Grashu. You know, seems like every 2 to 3 decades, new misnomers apply to us. Yesterday, being the 16th of February, Hollywood had released a Black Panther movie. And there seems to be a lot of write-up of new terminology coming out, new misnomers. And I know that with this audience that you have today, you know that we're all coming from the proper perspective. So I hope that you can answer this question as you're speaking to your great-grandson. Can you go in on the term that they seem to be pushing now is Afrofuturist?
Futurist.
And what's the definition of that term?
This is in regards to the Black Panther movie, saying that the movie's coming from an Afrofuturistic, anti-imperialist worldview.
Unfortunately, I haven't watched the movie yet. I made plans to see it this weekend. And once I do that, I can elaborate on that a little bit more. So I'm not sure the angle where they're going with that at the moment. But just dealing with, like you said, every couple of decades, terminology changes and the name changes of the people as well. And their ideals change. But as we went from beginning of our denationalization, we went from Blackamoor, which was the first declassification name, you know, to Negro, to Black, and then color. You know, it might be, one might have came before the other, but it was a transitional name, and every decades one would phase out into another, to where we into this Black. The past couple decades, Black has been the identity of the people, to the point where they start to fade that out and they moved into the African American identity. And that's what's really been being pushed today, is the African American identity, you know, and that was something that Jesse Jackson was actually pushing in his movement. And so a lot of people today don't want to refer to themselves as black from a Census Bureau perspective. They agree with the term African American. They think that sounds more accurate, which is still a mark, and it still has a 14th Amendment presence. So any futuristic type of terminology is going to be within these next couple decades is going to be centered around that African American idea. So, you know, Afrocentric, Afro-American, you know, at one time it was Afro-American to African American. It all means the same thing, and the people need to realize that regardless of what the Census Bureau and the Department of Interior call these people or classify the people to be, it all means the same thing. Negro, black, colored, Ethiopian was some of the marks back then. But any names that they're introducing now, it still has the same legal status quo. And they're going to be pushing names for us to use. One thing we got to realize, anytime a group of people other than the people themselves choose a name for those people, then that's declassification and denationalization. That means they got control over the name if they created a name for them people. The people themselves within their community or their tribe or their nation always through their representatives declared the name of their own people. Other people outside of you don't declare your name. So as long as we keep allowing or accepting other people to declare our name, we're going to always be in a slave national name perspective. And I think once they understand how that works, then they will stop allowing that. And even though if something seems that is close in name, it's still not the same. So even though African American sounds better than black, it's still a declassification name, and we should run far away from that term. Treat it no different than Negro or nigger. Treat it no different. And moving forward, they're going to be trying to, with this national ID and all of this stuff, they're going to be trying to look at names that seems more neutral to classify the new generations to come. And that's where we come in at, where we got to put brakes on that now. You know, we have to put more energy into the classification bureau of where they're going with this, and use these movies that we're speaking about, and whatever they're doing, we use this to our advantage to expose what they're trying to do. Because the movies and the radio and the news, they will expose what their future plans are. So we need to use that as like a reference, as an exhibit, and form the plebiscite against what they're trying to do. Say, hey, look, via this movie here, they put this thought pattern out. And this is where they're going in the new future. So before it gets that momentum, we need to put brakes on it and get the people involved right away on what they're trying to do. You know, and don't allow that momentum to pick up. Because once the momentum pick up, then they're forming the plebiscite. Then the people are against us. They got more numbers that's backing that thought than we do. So that's very important on that level. Another movie that they just put out during this so-called Black History Month is the Thurgood Marshall movie, and that's a lot of symbolism within that movie as well. And although that the word or the term civil rights is a big word or phrase that they're using in that movie, it encourages so-called black leaders and so-called people that's in that Afrocentric state to follow the footsteps of Thurgood Marshall, which he was considered a civil rights attorney. So you got to be careful when you're dealing with that, because it shows in the movie that as a civil rights attorney, he went through the Bar Association and he turned around and started representing people of the lower class that was unfortunate, that was being misprisoned and stuff like that. And it showed that he was successful with going through the court system as a bar attorney and protecting these people under civil rights and winning the cases. So it shows that his method was successful. Back to what we was discussing earlier. That with our case and what we did, we're in the court system, but we're not bar members. We're not civil rights attorneys, and we're not coming from a civil rights perspective, although the term gets semantic when you're dealing with the term civil rights. To a point, we are arguing civil rights, but we're not arguing the jurisdiction of civil rights, or what they classify as civil rights to be in the civil rights movement. Civil rights comes up under Title 42 of the United States Codes of Laws, which also is construed under the 14th Amendment. So if you're making a civil rights case or a civil rights argument, it's going to be construed under that whole civil rights perspective under the 14th Amendment, which you still have no standing at law from a natural person perspective, or from the sovereignty of the Republic of the people. So I think the movie is symbolically trying to push people into that direction of saying, hey man, this works. Oh, Thurgood Marshall, he was on the right track, and try to pick up where he left off with that. And I think it's a trap. So I also want to use that movie as a teaching tool to tell people you can use it for inspiration in certain areas, but I wouldn't follow the format of that whole civil rights thing. And another movie they put out, that came before that, which is doing the same thing, is that what was that movie that Joe Ali's picture was on? Esquire, Roman Israel Esquire. Yeah, that was another movie that just came out prior to that. That paved the way. It sort of serves as the same basis of the Thurgood Marshall, where Denzel Washington played the role of a civil rights attorney. He was a bar member, and he started taking cases just like Thurgood Marshall did, what they call low budget or pro bono cases, they call it. Like public defenders, where they were representing people that had no finances to represent themselves. So instead of turning them over to public defenders or people who really wasn't in their best interest, you had people like Thurgood Marshall that took these type of cases. But the status that they put them under is still 14th Amendment, so it still becomes discretionary on whether they want to honor a win or a success in that court. And I think they're trying to combat what we're doing, because they know that this Moorish divine movement is coming to its pinnacle, where it's really getting a lot of momentum. You got celebrities out there, you got rappers out there stating that they're not black, and they're trying to make a status change. It's getting more popular now. It's on the radios now. It's on Hot 97, where you got celebrities, actors, and you got rappers that's actually making statements about this now. So they know that it's getting more momentum. So they're trying to counter-react that momentum. So they got to put their own stuff out there to try to redirect people into another area. So be careful of what's going on with these movies and what they're putting out. Especially, again, we're talking about so-called Black History Month. They're going to be putting things out in this month that has that emotional movement of that black idea, that Afrocentric idea, which already has momentum. So if they can put something in that already has momentum, it gains more momentum. So that's why we put stuff out during this month too, to counter-react the momentum that they're already getting. So if we get more Moors to just do stuff like what y'all doing right now, then again, we can neutralize what's going on.
Islam, yes.
Yes, sir.
Say, give thanks for everything. If you could
Islam, thank you.
Applause.
Thank you to Izzy Bey for making this possible.
Moors, I also give thanks to you all for allowing me the opportunity to share my time and my thoughts with you. So it's an honor that, you push us to keep that momentum going. That's needed. Islam.
Islam, we're just gonna close out.
Islam, boy, sheik.
Islam, boy. Islam. See you, bro.
Islam. Islam, Kufa. Islam, Grand Sheik Kufa.
Peace and love, boy.
Peace and love. Peace and love is day. And all the rest of the Moors.
Islam. Climb on the left, two on the right. Allah, the Father of the universe.
Allah, the Father of the universe.
Father of love.
The Moors,
Truth. Peace. Freedom. And justice. Allah is my protector. My guide. And my salvation. By night. And by day. Through his holy prophet.
Islam.
Peace and love, more there.
Islam, peace and love, Moors.
Islam.
Keep up the good work.
We will, you too.
Thank you.